All right, so hello everybody. Today we're going to be going over all of the Fallout DLCs and expansions and little bonus content that you come across Fallout 3, New Vegas, and 4. So as always, I'm joined today by Joey, who's sporting the great Father Elijah little portrait today. I like that quite a bit.
Hello.
It's very
Yeah,
fitting.
among the best characters in Fallout universe, so definitely proud to rock that look.
Yeah, and he's one of those cool characters, and I know we'll probably get into it in the actual kind of lit ranking, but um, he's part of the reason I think why the New Vegas DLCs are so interesting because he kind of weaves his way through that. But we'll save that for a little bit. So, like I said, we're going to be going through the Fallout DLCs. We're going to be doing this on tiermaker.com, so you can absolutely jump on and do your own list and let us know what you think. Or if you're like, man, you guys are so stupid for putting that one at S or D, just leave a comment and let us know what you think. So, without further ado, here's the list. And like I said, we're going to be going kind of in the order that they were released. So, we're going to do all of the Fallout 3, then the New Vegas, then the 4, and kind of just go from there. So, Joey, I know you are much more of the Fallout expert than I am. So I'm going to let you have the first crack at the first one there.
Yeah, so Operation Anchorage, uh, definitely it's definitely a fan favorite. Doing a little bit of research into this, it's very highly rated,
Hmm.
which is interesting, and it definitely has a lot of pros. I mean, you kind of explore Fallout 3's engine in a new way where it's not necessarily a role-playing game anymore. You kind of enter it more as a first-person shooter. So, you enter the simulation and you get to experience Operation Anchorage. And there's a lot going for this DLC. I mean, you experience huge historical moments in the Fallout universe. Uh, the Battle of Anchorage against Communist China and the U.S. You get a closer look at the Brotherhood outcasts, which it's kind of funny because they're pretty widespread in Fallout 3. I mean, you have patrols going all over the place. You have them at Fort, I believe, Independence. Um, I forgot what their main base is, but there's not really much looking at them as a faction. I mean, you get to meet their leader, and they're kind of briefly mentioned in some dialogue from people in Citadel. Uh, but that's about it. So this is a cool way to kind of get deeper into their side of things. You get to talk to their paladins, you get to talk to some of their scribes, and you get a little bit closer look at their faction. Um, and then, but more on an actual game playing aspect, it adds a lot of really valuable things to the game. So we get the kind of the big iconic loot at the end of the game, the T-51 winterized armor. And that's a pretty important piece of armor because, well, you know, it doesn't degrade,
Mm-hmm.
which is huge in Fallout 3 because everything degrades and it's kind of a pain in the butt to constantly be repairing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And in the original base game, the original T-51 armor that's in Fort Constantine,
Mm-hmm.
uh, one, there's only really a few ways to do the quest where you actually get that armor.
Mm-hmm.
And in addition, it degrades and there's nothing in the game that repairs it. So this is kind of a good fix for that. And it's a great way to start the game because you could do this DLC very early on. As a part of it, they train you in power armor, and then you get
No.
a suit of some of the best power armor in the game that does not degrade. So that in itself, I mean, I know a lot of people, the first thing they do when they get out of Vault 101 is run over to do the simulation, which is pretty impressive. There's a few DLCs I could think of in Fallout games where that's just the first thing people do straight out of the bat.
Yeah, I was actually going into this planning on putting Anchorage a little bit lower than it sounds like you were thinking of putting it. But you made a really good point, because I always think about it, and I'm going kind of purely off of gameplay and kind of what I remember of as the items. And I was never the
Sure.
biggest power armor aficionado. Of course I used it, but um, that wasn't like the key thing that I remembered from Operation Anchorage. I do agree that the kind of the way you enter the story is really a really cool, unique way to do it. And it's something that you could literally do infinitely, and I wouldn't really get bored of it. Like, you could have had an operation, I don't know, Canada, or operation, Taiwan or something like that off the coast of China, and I would have been really interested in doing it, even if we were introduced to it the same way. You just get in your little pod, it closes, and then you're in it. My big drawbacks of this one was always that it felt kind of short, and it kind of felt like it was, like you said, it was a first person shooter, but it felt like it was just one mission from a Call of Duty game, and then that was the end of it. And I
That's a
kind of
fair description.
yeah, I kind of came away with it thinking, I really wish I could have played more of this, because it was a lot of fun. But you brought up a good point, that it changes the game into a first person shooter. And that's something that I haven't really thought about before. I never really thought, I've never thought of Operation Anchorage as, a first person shooter. It's kind of just a Fallout game. But you're right. And so I should probably not treat it the same way I would treat things like, Far Harbor or The Pit, which are more traditional Fallout style games. This was them trying to do something different. And you know what? I agree. I do like that a little bit.
Yeah, but there's also a caveat to that whole first person shooter part of, um, and I would say it's probably my biggest negative, aside from the fact that Operation Anchorage is very short, is that they make it into a first person shooter, and that's about the weakest element of the Fallout 3 engine.
Hmm.
Combat in Fallout 3, I love the game, but it's very kind of, clunky. It doesn't work smoothly. Aiming's weird, fighting's weird, shooting's weird, people move around weird. So even though they turn it into a new game by making it a first person shooter, in my opinion, they actually kind of tap on Fallout 3's one of its weakest aspects,
Mm-hmm.
um, which I think is definitely, doesn't necessarily do them a service. You brought up an interesting part where you said you would like to really see that, this same kind of aspect rehashed out in different things, like doing the annexation of Canada or an invasion of China and stuff like that. And I think that's really interesting. I would love to see them do that, or would have loved to see them do that with Fallout 4, because
Mm-hmm.
Fallout 4 makes up where a lot of Fallout 3's weaknesses are, where Fallout 4's combat is so much smoother. They have the full on different button for a grenade, which is very reminiscent of, Call of Duties or Battlefields. So I would have really loved to see this be something that gets repeated in every game, where every game there's a DLC where you do a new simulation of a historic event. It would allow them to do a lot more world building, and it would be a cool thing to see. And it's something that they've definitely improved upon a lot.
Yeah.
Um, Another aspect that I found was pretty cool about this DLC was it added weapons that the game really needed.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the other reward weapons you get is Jingwei's shock sword, which is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the shock sword of the end boss. And that's really valuable because in Fallout 3, really, if you're doing a melee character build, you start the game and you either use a lead pipe, or if you're lucky, you find a combat knife,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all you use for the first several levels until you're able to build a shish kebab.
Mm-hmm.
And then the shish kebab is literally the only weapon that you use for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Uh, it is by far the best weapon, and to its credit, it is a really good weapon, and no other weapon really competes with it. And to be fair, if you get the pyrotechnic perk, the shish kebab still is the best weapon. But at least Jingwei's shock sword gives you another option that's at least competitive in the game. It's still not quite as great as the shish kebab, but it gives you something where if you've been, playing Fallout 3 melee build and you put in tons of hours doing it and you're tired of seeing people get burned to death with your sword, now you can electrocute them, and it gives a little bit different options. Also introduces the Gauss rifle. I never use that very much. I don't typically use energy weapons all that much in Fallout 3, but I know a lot of people really love it. So that's another great weapon that was included.
Yeah, yeah. I think we also have to make a note of the fact that this was the first DLC for a Fallout game. Under the Bethesda Fallout. So they didn't really know what would work and what wouldn't work. They were really just trying something to see what happened. So I think that, I give a lot of credit to trying something new. Even if it doesn't work, I always appreciate trying something new. So, I think back in our last little ranking video where we talked about the World of Warcraft expansions, I gave a lot of credit to, I think, Warlords of Draenor for trying something new, and that's why I feel like it's a little bit better than a lot of people let on. But I think that's probably the same for this one. I have to give Anchorage a little bit of deference because they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know if a DLC like this would even work in the Fallout universe.
Definitely.
Yeah.
As kind of a final note, I do have to also agree with you on the aspect it is very short. You have essentially the opening slog of disabling the cannons. You get to home base, you get to assemble your team. You do, I believe, 2 to 3. I'm pretty sure it's 3 kind of side missions where you take out, I think it's a fuel supply, a listening post, and something else. And then you go straight and you take out General Jingwei. So it's really effectively 4, maybe 5, I guess 3 missions, and the second one is broken up into 3 smaller sections, but it is very short.
Yeah.
And then also something I like about a lot of the Fallout DLCs is kind of collectible items, where things were, collecting all these different holotapes or finding all these different posters or finding all these collectible cards. The only thing Operation Anchorage had that was the Intel briefcases. You can find Intel briefcases throughout, but there wasn't that many. I think there was, less than 10. I think there was maybe like 5 or 6 of them. And I think if you found them all, they gave you a small bonus to sneak afterwards, but really it felt kind of, there wasn't that much collectibleness to it, or kind of finding those weird hidden things, which, again, to your point, this was their first try at it, and they did include some form of collectability, but not as much as I might have hoped they would have.
Yeah. Okay. So where are you thinking that the Operation Anchorage would land on this little chart we have? Yeah.
I mean, it's tough. I would give it a B.
Okay. That's about what I was thinking as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to, if the combat was better in Fallout, again, if this came out in Fallout 4, it probably would have been an A or even maybe an S. Maybe not an S, but it would have been higher, but it's just, they played on essentially Fallout 3's weakest component.
Yeah.
But aside that, it was great and added really things that were needed to be added in terms of items.
Yeah, and I agree, and it really gave us a look into the apocalypse Fallout world, which I feel like a lot of people have been calling for, and even to this day, they want more of that kind of look into the world before the bombs fell. So I agree. I was leaning more towards C, but you kind of talked me up to B. Okay, so next up is the Pit, and I think the Pit is just radically different from Operation Anchorage, because in Operation Anchorage, again, like you said, the the focal point of the DLC was supposed to be the action. You know, they weren't really telling that compelling of a story. The Pit is completely different. It takes you to Pittsburgh. You know, there's like a compelling story that is kind of interesting, and you kind of have to play through it a few times or really do a lot of background research to find the significance of actually what you're doing there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I always found the kind of end reward that they promised, the ability to kind of make your own ammunition, was always such a cool idea, and it was such a cool reward. But I don't think I've ever gotten around to actually making ammunition after I beat the Pit. It's just kind of, you leave and that's the end of it. But it feels kind of from a role playing perspective, it feels pretty cool to go back into the Capital Wastelands, and you've kind of in the back of your head you think, oh, I've got this little territory in the Pit where I could make as much ammo as I want. You know, I'm starting to rebuild society again.
Yeah. The Pit adds a lot. I mean, you know, to your point, I definitely never really used that ammo production thing either. I'm sure it's incredibly useful. It's just never something I did. But I feel like the Pit started something that I really, really love about Fallout DLCs, and that's it strips you of equipment. I think you're able to bring some equipment with you. I don't remember the exact weight limitations on it, but it really forces you to rely on skills, kind of rely on your actual skill as a player. You know, not necessarily just brute strength guns, explosive, big guns, melees. Things like repair are very important. Speech, barter, you know, you kind of need those things on top of normal survival skills to survive. And it adds a new, like, it forces you to be creative when you play. And I really like that aspect. Another thing I think that they did very well in the Pit was they got the atmosphere right. You know, everybody is just filthy. Like, every person you look has, you know, whatever dirt texture you could add onto a player character, they've got it all over them. Even Asher, the main, the raider leader, you know, essentially the wealthiest guy in town, he's just as filthy as everybody else. Like, everybody is dirty. The air is filled with smog. There's a bit of this kind of hazy, rusty glow about everything. You know, the big enemies are either raiders, filthy raiders, or like these just mutated troglodytes. So I feel like they got, you know, industrialized wasteland just down perfect, where it's not just the radiation, it's just this all pervasive pollution that's just everywhere. And I felt like they did a great job with that. They really set a perfect atmosphere for it.
No, I agree, and I definitely feel like of pretty much all of the DLCs we're going to be talking about today, the Pit is the one where I could see an entire Fallout game based. You know, I could have seen them blow that up into a whole Fallout game where you're kind of competing with Asher and trying to find the cure and mining and doing the whole slave battles. Like, I really think that world just sucks you in like a Capital Wastelands, like a Mojave. Like, it's just a very interesting environment, and something I've always wanted to see in a Fallout game is, you know, not necessarily just the desolate emptiness of a wasteland, but what would a city look like if suddenly, you know, there's no more electricity, there's no more power, there's radiation everywhere. You know, survivors would obviously go to the city because there's a lot of resources, but, you know, what would that look like? And I feel like no Fallout game really captured it as well as the Pit did. You know, in Fallout 3, you're running through DC and you're going over waterways and you're running into raiders or super mutants that are kind of encamped, but it still feels like you're almost just in a valley running through like mountains. The Pit felt like you were going through alleyways and just heavily built up environments that weren't just wiped out and crumbled away. And I really liked that aspect of the pit, kind of going to your point about um, um, atmosphere.
Definitely. And you bring up a good point too. And even in the capital wasteland, there's still, you can see that it used to be beautiful. There's these great massive white marble buildings, and they're cracked and they're decayed, but there's a remnants of what was, and it used to be good. The pit was never beautiful. It was always ugly.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got so much uglier after the war.
Sorry,
And
Pittsburgh.
yeah, no offense. But it's has a different feel to it, where it was never this, kind of grand civilization. It was always kind of this industrial place, and it's not changed from that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and moving on from that, it's the characters in this, you know, there's not all that much dialogue in this DLC. They're far, far more than Anchorage, but still, it's a little skinny on the dialogue. But the characters are so interesting, and what bit of dialogue they do have is very well used. Like Asher is one of the most interesting characters in Fallout, where he's even though he's this raider leader who's enslaved this entire city, he's actually kind of a good guy. Like even when I have good playthroughs in the Fallout 3, I almost always side with Asher because he's just such like a gray character. It's almost the ends justify the means. And his kind of opponent, Warner, is the exact same. They're both have these grand ideals of what they're trying to accomplish, but the actual, you know, execution of it is very ugly. Uh, Asher uses slave. Warner wants to kidnap and experiment on a baby. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a good ending to it, and I feel like that storyline matches the aesthetic so well, where it's ugly no matter what you choose. There's not really a good option.
Yeah, and I mean, you gotta kind of going over Asher's um, moral grayness, I guess you could say. Sure, he's enslaved all these people and done horrible things, but he's kind of the one that brought the pit together after the Brotherhood swept through the area. They wanted to eradicate everybody pretty much. If I recall correctly, they thought it was
Well,
too
they wanted to
erased.
steal the kids too.
Well,
Don't forget that.
no, that too. But I mean, Asher gets there, and he, sure, it's not the nicest society, um, but at least it's a start where you're relatively safe.
Hmm.
Sure, you're enslaved, but is what's the Saren quote? Is slavery not preferable to extermination? It's you're living in a world where you need his protection. And I feel
Yeah.
like he brings up a lot of points that were echoed later with Caesar in Caesar's Legion, where, he's not a nice guy, but he's creating a society that has a decent chance at surviving and eventually progressing to a more egalitarian society. That I guess that's the idea. And I know a
Yeah.
lot of people like Caesar and think, oh, Caesar's Legion's the right choice. Asher's the first embodiment of that. I mean, we're living in a post-apocalyptic world. There are not going to be choices that are just easy, that you can just
Hmm.
make and fix everything. You can't just go, kill the Enclave, or stop them from using an orbital gun. That you have to make tough decisions and cut corners in order
Hmm.
to get people to survive. So I think the pit does a very good job at creating that kind of uh, almost the most realistic of the Fallout DLCs, because
Definitely,
they can
without a
kind of
doubt.
get a little silly sometimes, but the pit is something I could watch or I could play through and say it wouldn't surprise me if this is how certain areas would end up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, a lot of Fallout is very goofy. There is
Mm-hmm.
nothing goofy about the pit. It
No.
is serious down to the end.
Yeah.
Another cool aspect about it, and I kind of talked about this a little bit, is the collection aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to collect the ingots in this game. And I
Mm-hmm.
know probably a lot, or in this DLC, I know a lot of people hated the ingots because it was such a pain in the butt to collect all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I really liked it. I really liked the idea of, okay, you're in this pit, you're in a slightly safe area, and then you kind of go into effectively the pit's wasteland, which is still city, but it's the part that's overrun by the trogs. And, you have to collect these ingots to get better weapons, but you're kind of using your existing resources to get the ingots. And I like that aspect for the people who are going for the 100% completion thing. I find ingots and collection stuff like that very rewarding and very enjoyable. So I like that they included that in this. They also include, again, a great replacement for the shish kebab. Uh, I blank on the name of it, but essentially the grinder, the
Yeah.
giant chainsaw, uh, is actually the only really melee weapon that holds its own against the shish kebab and has really probably comparable, if not better, damage, which is pretty dope. It's rather enjoyable, kind of using bats and slowly grinding things to death.
Uh-huh.
Um, but aside from that, the weapons and armor introduced in the pit are pretty lackluster.
Yeah.
I mean, you have really a handful of weapons. You have a silenced um, 10 millimeter submachine gun. You have a special revolver. I think you get a special laser pistol. But really, this melee chainsaw thing is really the only weapon that's usable after it, and is really adds that much to the game. Same thing with armor. You get Asher's tribal power armor afterwards. In all reality, I never use that after the DLC. It looks cool. I love it aesthetically, um, but it's not really that great of a armor set or weapon set that's included that you'll actually bring back to you to the capital wasteland and use on a regular basis. So that's one kind of ding I'll put on it, that in terms of weapons and armor, it's definitely a little bit lackluster.
Yeah, I'd also say with just to kind of finish up your point about the weapons, if I recall, the DLC is kind of almost built around that grinder. Like
Very much so.
that's something that you're given, and it's really a focal point of the DLC. It's almost like that's the point. That's what you're supposed to use. That's what the DLC is kind of leading you towards. Which, if a D, if it if a DLC really pushes a particular playstyle, and that playstyle is pretty good in that DLC, I'm gonna give it a little bit of extra point, like extra credit,
Uh-huh.
because sure they didn't have a lot of extra stuff that made all the difference when you got back to the Capital Wasteland. But I can tell you, when I was playing through this, when I got my grinder and kind of fought with it, I had a strange feeling putting it away after I left the pit, because it's like this was my weapon for the past few hours. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting little I don't know, little aspect of it.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, and this has so much stuff going for it. Another aspect I really like about this DLC is it actually connects and is described and talked about in the base game, where very few DLCs in Fallout 3 do that.
Mm-hmm.
Where, Elijah talks about Asher, I'm pretty sure by name. Kodiak, a member of Lion's Pride, talks about being from uh, the pit, and then in the pit you fight Kodiak's two brothers in the little arena thing. So there's actually a lot of connections to the base game,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that's very rewarding when you play it. When you kind of go in and you're like, oh my gosh, like I kind of know who these two people are. These two crazy animal humans I'm fighting. I know who this Asher guy is. There's connections to it, and I really like that. Uh, One last kind of ding I'm going to put on it
Mm-hmm.
is that, or two, there's not very much diversity in terms of opponents you fight. They're all either raiders,
Yeah.
or I guess slaves, depending on which side you take, or trogs.
Mm-hmm.
So really, those are the only two opponent types you're going to fight. I think there's maybe one or two, a handful of wild men type thing, just crazy people out in the wasteland. But really, you don't have that much diversity in the units you fight. So I can see how that will get a little bit boring after a while. And then secondly, I think a big benefit of stripping people of their equipment is forcing them to use their skills in interesting ways. But you don't really use skills very much in this. Like there's not very that many opportunities to use repair or use, science or medicine. I think of only one situation where you can activate a few protectrons to help you in the troglodyte area, and that's really it. Fallout 3 doesn't really have a great crafting system, so it's not like in Fallout New Vegas where you can craft your way through certain DLCs. There's not really that option in this, so I feel like that's definitely something that holds this DLC down, where I wish there was more you could do with crafting to kind of help you through the pit, and there's just not, in my opinion, very many options to do that.
Yeah. No, and I think you're definitely right. I think you're definitely right with that. So, where did you have the pit landing?
I had it on A.
Okay, that was actually. Well, I feel like we're going to be pretty similar on most of these, but
Yeah,
I agree. I think A is the right spot for it. Operation Anchorage was fun, a good experience, but I think the pit outclasses it on almost every turn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to Broken Steel, and this was the first. Well, I guess, of course, it's the first DLC that did this because it was the first Fallout game from Bethesda. But it's the first DLC that let you play past the main quest line. So if you remember Fallout 3, you activate the water purifier. And that's it. You're done. The game's over. You have the credits, you have the little epilogue scene, and then you're over. Broken Steel, you wake up and you manage to survive the radiation pouring into you, and you're on the offensive against the Enclave with Liberty Prime. And then suddenly you lose Liberty Prime, and you've got to go through this entire kind of quest line to kind of eradicate the Enclave. And the Enclave is always a fun enemy to fight in Fallout games.
Definitely.
Yeah. So
yeah,
go ahead.
I have very mixed feelings about Broken Steel.
Okay.
I think if you take it into the fact that, to your point, it lets you play after Project Purity, and it gives you a lot of closure, and it lets you kind of continue that journey, adds tons of content, I would almost put that as an S. However, personally, I feel like a lot of what was in Broken Steel should have just been in base Fallout 3. Like, the game ending at Project Purity is in many ways very unsatisfying. And a lot of the things Broken Steel adds to the game just feels like it should have been in the game anyways. It adds kind of the whole quest line on the Children of the Atom. Again, that was really fun stuff, but I feel like it maybe should have just been in the base game. You maybe should have just been able to finish off the Enclave. I have mixed feelings about it, where I feel like it is a perfect addition. If we're just looking at it, what it added to Fallout 3, it is one of the best DLCs out there. But I also feel like what it added to Fallout 3 should have just been in Fallout 3 anyways. But saying that, I'm not saying it's all negative. It added tons of stuff. One of the coolest things about it is it adds way more to the evil karma ending. Evil karma ending in Fallout 3 is kind of lame. All you do is like, okay, cool, I'm going to poison this water. You don't get to see what happens, at least with, activating Project Purity in the good way. It's like, okay, cool, I provide water. You don't really know what's, exactly going to happen with the bad ending. So by adding a new ending of either destroying Adams Air Force Base or nuking the Citadel, that's something very tangible. Like, being an evil guy and getting to destroy Citadel, riding on the Brotherhood of Steel's own vertibird back to their base you just nuked, and then finishing off the rest of them, like that felt like a very fitting evil guy thing to do.
Yeah.
So I really like that aspect of it.
And it kind of
Uh,
plays off of I think one of the cooler decisions you can make in any Fallout game, which is deciding to detonate the megaton nuke for Tenpenny to get the eyesore out of his front yard, but it takes it to such an extreme. Like, yes, this is what would happen if we're dealing with these two rival forces, and one of them is just vastly technologically superior. In this kind of world, you don't really get to fight fair. You get nuked, and that's it. And
yeah,
so I,
definitely.
I like that, and I like the fact that you have to deal with the the Enclave, but you kind of see their advancements. So you see that they're building these iBots. You see that they've actually exceeded their typical Enclave armor that you see in the first two Fallout game, or I guess maybe the second Fallout game. I don't know if it's in the first one, but you see it in the second game. But they've made progress. They've got the Hellfire Armor now, and so you're kind of seeing progress is being made by this faction that's supposed to be evil, whereas the good faction, the Brotherhood of Steel, they're like clinging on to the vestiges of the past, and they're not really moving forward. Whereas the Enclave is trying to revive the world, and they've actually I won't say they haven't skipped a beat, but in base game Fallout 3, you go into the Raven Rock and then you blow it up, and it's like, all right, well that's it. They were kind of lame. Like, they were an advanced military, but it almost seemed like they were just a kind of a holdout if you don't
Yeah,
know the broader Fallout lore. But Broken Steel definitely makes it feel like, no, these guys are the threat. These guys are either the saviors of the world or it's doom. That's kind of the vibe you get from them.
yeah. And to your point, yeah, they Broken Steel definitely adds a lot of interesting stuff. Uh, Especially the items. You brought up the Hellfire armor. Anytime I play Fallout 3, the Hellfire power armor is always what I use.
Mm-hmm.
Looks great, is some of the best damage threshold you can get. So that's great armor. It adds the Tesla cannon, very
Mm-hmm.
iconic weapon. It adds the tri-beam laser. It adds a lot of new enemies. You get the mutant overlord, the albino rad scorpion, the reaver ghoul. Really effectively the most difficult enemies you're going to come across, except for maybe a Deathclaw or a super mutant behemoth. So it definitely does add a lot. You get to go to the old only power plant and just fight wave after wave of Deathclaws. So it does feel like it adds a lot of end game stuff to it, which is very satisfying. It's exactly what Fallout 3 needed. But again, I'm split on the rating because it's taken objectively, it's a spectacular DLC, but I just feel like a lot of it should have just been in the base game anyways.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to be honest, I mean, I love the Enclave as an enemy, but I'm with you. Like, if you take away the fact you get to continue after and have a little bit of a story, there's there's not a ton of meat on the bone.
No.
Um, so and I can't give you as much credit if it's kind of just more of the same. Like, the pit was fun because it was totally different than Fallout 3. And
Yeah.
some of the other ones we'll be talking about, I think why we like them is because they're totally different than the game they're found in. Um, Broken Steel is just more Fallout,
Yeah.
Fallout 3. So yeah, so what are you leaning on for the ranking in this one?
I'm gonna have to go B with it.
Okay, okay. I
Yeah.
was
What
actually
what would you put it at?
I was gonna do C or B.
Okay.
It kind honestly A, B, or C. It like, depending on what I want to focus on, it can kind of range. But I think B is a good spot because it does do a lot for the game. But like you said, it didn't change the game in any meaningful way for me.
No, and to your point, it didn't do anything new either.
Yeah, yeah. So I think B is a good spot for Broken Steel. Now, talk about atmosphere. Point Lookout. What do you think of this one?
I mean, it's, in my opinion, the best DLC for Fallout 3.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people dislike it because it's incredibly difficult, which I totally understand. You will definitely go in there with full ammo, full power armor, face a hillbilly with a shotgun, and just get your ass handed to you the first time you go in.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just great. I mean, to your point, the atmosphere makes this DLC. You have mutated hillbillies, tripped out tribals on punga fruit, a ghoul James Bond, a mad scientist with just who's just a brain floating and stuff, trying to mind control people. Uh, Everything about it is perfect, and I feel like it's so iconic because just the entryway into it, where you're just sailing up to the dock, and it's just this very misty and dark and very mysterious thing. And they have this great thing where one of the hillbillies is just kind of like wandering on the beach, and so you're just kind of, there's just a lot of mystery of like, who's that random dude walking the beach, and even from this distance he looks kind of scary. And then you just kind of pull up to this boardwalk that looks like a little decaying amusement park, and it's just, everything about it is so just dark and foreboding, and just, it creates a spectacular atmosphere. And it's really fitting because it is dark and it is really scary. Like, these, you don't want to be caught at night in the swamps with these hillbillies. Like, that's, and just me saying that sounds like a scary ass situation to find yourself in.
Yeah, and I, this DLC, kind of like the Pit, it's got such a good atmosphere that it's actually where I would want the next Fallout game to be. Is like New Orleans, or somewhere in like a south kind of swampy area, because again, I've had we do a lot of desert wastelands. This was not a desert. There's plenty of water. Now the water's not safe, but there's plenty of it. And you're just feeling this kind of different vibe than you get in the other Fallout. Definitely in Fallout 3 anywhere else, but really any Fallout. It's a completely unique experience, I think.
Yeah. And just, I just love some of the additional decorations, like, kind of a lot of the hillbilly or mutated swamp folk. A lot of their decorations are just dolls, just impaled on spikes and stuff like that, or hung from trees. And it's just this swamp that's just bubbling up gases that might explode. A ghoul in like a ruined plantation building, a decrepit, amusement park. Like, it's just, everything about it is just eerie and creepy, and not unlike the Pit where it's just intimidating and it's ugly. This, it's different. It's just more of like, it almost feels like a Scooby-Doo rated R episode where it's just very creepy.
Yeah.
And to that creepiness, it adds a lot of very cool stuff. You get Obadiah Blackhall in his side quest, where you get a little bit of closure on the Dunwich building horrors, where the book and all that stuff you find in the Dunwich building, you need to deliver to him, and it kind of just shows some cosmic horror or witchcraft. I don't know what you would want to call it, but a different aspect where a lot of Fallout is obviously sci-fi, and this adds kind of more of like a traditional fantasy almost scariness to it, which I really like.
Yeah, I just to cut you off really quick.
Go for it.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there with like Eldritch. It's not objective, or I guess it's not jump scary. It's you think about it. Like, I know when I first went there, for the first probably couple of hours, I was thinking, are these swamp people that I'm fighting, are they intelligent? Like, are they animals? Or like, what, am I fighting a super mutant, or am I fighting a tribal person that's completely changed into something else and just doesn't understand me? But you're also dealing with the fact that they seem to know this area. They seem to know something about this place that I don't. and you're definitely an outsider walking in, and there's just kind of this, like you said, kind of eldritch or cosmic horror aspect to it, which is so funny because it's just a swamp. Like there's no creature of the deep or anything like that. It's just a very foreboding place, and
Yeah,
I loved it. I loved playing through it.
yeah. One of the great things this introduces, or not introduces, but really does a great job of, is side quests in DLCs, where
Mm-hmm.
it's not just all main quest line. You have Obadiah Blackhall trying to collect the Dunwich Building books. You have making moonshine with some random old lady in the middle of the swamp. You
Mm-hmm.
have the Ghoul Arena. You have the Chinese spy mission, which is one of the coolest
Mm-hmm.
missions. I
Yeah.
love doing that one. Um, on top of that, it adds some pretty interesting weapons. None of them are spectacularly great. The double-barreled shotgun, gross damage, but take it or leave it. The axe, uh, again, kind of a melee weapon. Biogas canister, semi-good explosives weapon. The lever action rifle.
Mm.
This gun is really what it's all about. I use it in every playthrough. It's essentially the Lincoln rifle, Lincoln repeater, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, eventually, if you're going to do a full completion, you need to give that Lincoln repeater to either the Slavers of Paradise Fall or uh, the people at the Lincoln Monument. This gives you your own option to do that. The Blackwater Rifle, which is a unique version of the lever action rifle, is a spectacular weapon. Um, but it's also kind of a rustic look to it. It almost looks like it's like a Civil War era weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that aspect where, nothing's advanced here. There's no, super crazy energy weapons or these great machine guns. It's all really simple weapons that just dump out gross amounts of damage.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it adds something, a replacement for the Lincoln repeater, which is needed in the base Fallout game. But it doesn't go, it doesn't change the world in terms of adding weapons or armor. Um, yeah, it. Oh, I actually nearly forgot on side quests. You also have the pint-sized slasher thing where
Mm-hmm.
you find that little kid in like the kind of like basement cave thing, and it turns out that was the old hideout for the pint-sized slasher, which is this kind of thing that's brought up in Tranquility Lane. It's brought
Mm-hmm.
up in newspaper clippings in loading screens. This kind of child mass killer thing that was around pre-war. So I like how they added that just to in case the cosmic horror wasn't enough. Now you kind of have the remnants of old serial killers, where you essentially it's the only place you can have a player home on the island.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah, no, just pretty much across the board. I mean, sure, the items don't, they're nothing to write home about,
Uh-huh.
but in terms of my opinion, but they nail the feel, and when I'm so engrossed in an area that I don't even care really what I'm picking up, I think that's a success.
Yeah.
So I know where I would want to put this one ranking wise. Where are you feeling?
So I've said a lot of positive things, and it's very difficult to think of any negative to say about this DLC.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One thing I do have to say is people are right. It is ridiculously hard. You can
Yes.
go in there with full Hellfire power armor and the best laser Gatling gun in the game, and three hillbillies with a shotgun are still going to kick your butt.
Mm-hmm.
So I do get it. Their health pool is ridiculous. Their damage is dumb. So that is something that's difficult. In terms of the main quest, there's not a lot of alternative choices. You can either take Desmond's side against the main kind of bad guy, the doctor, or you can take the doctor's side, who betrays you in the end, and you kill the doctor anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a lot of player choice in terms of how to end it, which isn't a terrible thing, but who's to say I don't want to help the doctor mind control everybody in the world?
Mm-hmm.
If I want to do that, I want the option to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, the tribals. I like the fact that they had tribals in this game. It's really the first introduction of tribals in Bethesda's
Mm-hmm.
universe of Fallout. Um, but it's very superficial. It's basically just a bunch of hippies doing Ponga fruit and getting high.
Yeah.
So I would have liked to see a little bit more, of like, are these tribals from Point Lookout? In which case, why aren't they, mutated swamp folk? Or are they people who came to it? There's just not a lot of backstory on them, and I would have liked to see that. All that being said, for me, this is an easy S.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, best DLC in Fallout 3 and one of the best Fallout DLCs ever.
Yeah, I agree, and you're right that the main quest is not. It's not the best. It's not. I mean, there are pieces of this that are not perfect, but when I think of like when we first talked about this, and we were talking about Fallout 3 DLCs, this is the one I thought about right away.
Yeah.
It's just it really goes to show if you nail atmosphere, it really makes up for a lot of other deficiencies. And that's not to say that there was the quests weren't fun there. Like you said, there was a lot of memorable, fun quests. It was just a cool, almost sandbox to go in and do your thing and explore on your own. Compared to the Pit and Anchorage, which were incredibly linear. You go down this line and that's it.
Yeah. This was very open world, and I definitely like that aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, going to one that was not necessarily a straight linear path as much as a circular, rotating hallway simulator, Mothership Zeta.
And hallway simulator, I love that.
and I say that because I do actually really like Mothership Zeta. It's where they really take wacky to the nth degree in Fallout 3. You get abducted by aliens that are trying to destroy the world. So you have to go and fight your way through the entire spacecraft, encountering all of these other people that the aliens have abducted over the years, from military medics from right before the bombs fell to a literal samurai that just disappears periodically and then shows up hours later after carving through an army of aliens. It's just it is very silly, but they lean into it. They really emphasize how ridiculous things can be, but you get these awesome alien weapons. Kind of across the board, the alien stuff was really cool. You get the repair polymer, I think it's called, which honestly, the moment I picked that up the first time, I thought this is too valuable to ever use because it just fixes everything. And you just get a lot of those really unique things where it's cool. I can't remember if this one, when you go in, you lose all your items. No, I don't think you do. I think you keep all your items.
It's limited though. I think how much you can bring.
But it was one where I went in there, and I went in with the terrible shotgun, I think, and that was it, because I knew I wanted to pick up every single thing that dropped from that DLC. And in terms of like collectible items, I mean, you've got all of these different items. Like you have to go through the garbage the garbage kind of conveyor belt to get I forget the guy's name. It's like Colonel Gray or whatever, but to get his trench coat or his military outfit. And it's just like usually a part of the game where you're like, okay, it's a trash pit, we'll just run through it. And it's like, no, there's unique items there. And you've got all of these cool outfits, like I said, the winterized military medic's uniform and the samurai armor, but you kind of have to kill the people to take them. And so you've got this weird choice that you have to make of, well, am I going through this alien ship with my compatriots, or am I killing them and taking their stuff because I want it?
Yeah,
It's very Fallout, and there's not a ton of player choice besides that, but it was just a fun run and gun kind of DLC.
definitely. I mean, you're definitely right. It adds a lot of good equipment. Most notably for me is the Nova Surge. It's
Mm-hmm.
a unique plasma pistol. In my opinion, by far the best energy weapon in all of Fallout 3.
Mm-hmm.
It just destroys everything. All the alien weapons are spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
I I love and hate the fact it adds so many alien power cells.
Mm-hmm.
Because one, it's such a finite number in Fallout 3 that it's really nice that you can actually use your alien weapons a little bit more, you know, have a little bit more fun with it.
Yeah.
At the same time, it does eliminate the uniqueness of finding those energy cells. Um, I really like the weapons they added. You got, drone cannons, you've got the katana, you've got atomizers, disintegrators. However, some of those I think take away from, for example, unique drops like the fire lance, the super unique alien weapon that, base game is definitely one of the most powerful energy weapons in the game. Uh, but then this introduces a lot more alien weapons where suddenly weapons like the fire lance are just less interesting, less
Mm-hmm.
exciting, and I don't like that so much. I wish, I don't know, they bumped up the fire lance's stats a little bit when this came out to make it still a little bit more competitive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to your point, the alien poxy in a game Fallout 3 where
Oh, that's
repairing
really sweet.
items is one of the biggest pains in the butt you could ever deal with. This was a huge boon.
Mm-hmm.
All these alien weapons, Fallout 3, and a big difference from Fallout New Vegas is it's tough to make money. Like
Mm-hmm.
Fallout New Vegas, you find a hunting rifle, and if it's in good condition, you can sell that for like 2,000 caps. Um, this game, if you find a really good hunting rifle, maybe you can sell it for 100 caps. So these alien weapons are actually really expensive. And it's something I always did, fighting the Enclave is one of the biggest things. Is collect as many energy weapons and power armor as you can get, because really this is where you're going to make all your money in the game. And you're definitely right going into it with nothing but the terrible shotgun, because you need to save all the room you can get to just bring as much of this crap with you.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because really this will pay for you for the rest of the game, and I like that aspect. Um, you're definitely right. Atmosphere in this game, com- completely opposite from the pit. It totally is wacky. It's totally goofy. And it's great because it doesn't take itself seriously. It's
Mm-hmm.
not trying to be cool. It's not trying to be edgy. It's just goofy and it's fun. It's a little bit childish, and it's something Fallout 3's DLC roster needed. It
Mm-hmm.
needed something fun, a little bit lighthearted. Um, terms of collectability, the I think they're called captive logs, where you go and collect, interviews or recordings of them, capturing people or experimenting on people. There's tons of them. So if you're doing a 100% completion thing, it really will take up a lot of time to do, and it feels really rewarding when you get them all. And they're super funny to listen to. Like, it's just super kind of ridiculous, just sounds like they're all coming from super low budget sci-fi movies. So it's very fun. It's definitely a good bit of fun to have. But to your point, the environment is incredibly repetitive,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's probably by far the most criticized aspect of this DLC is the fact that you're just running down the same hallway with slightly different textures over and over and over again. So it is fun, but it definitely can get a little bit boring.
Yeah, and it doesn't have a ton to do with the broader story of Fallout. So
No.
I know, like that General Chase's overcoat. I think it was that you find.
Yeah.
Um, that's the same General Chase from Operation Anchorage. It's just his real life overcoat, and like there's little things that link it to the Fallout world, but besides the engine and the kind of wackiness, that you could tell me that was not from Fallout 3, and I'd be like, yeah, okay. It there's nothing that ties it really to the world. I think. So,
Yeah.
like I said, it's a fun little adventure, but I think that's all I really think of it as.
Yeah, and they could have very easily done better with that. Like, the characters, your, pseudo companions in this
Hmm.
DLC are probably the best companions
Yeah.
you come across of any DLC. Like, Paulson, the medic, um, this little girl who's almost just playing games with the aliens. The you have the cowboy, you
Hmm.
have the katana wielding samurai, you have this the scavenger. It would have been very easy to just, you know, see Paulson walking around in Megaton, or
Yeah.
see that same scavenger you saw in Rivet City, and it could have not even a single line of dialogue, just been like, "Oh, hey, nice to see you somewhere nicer this time." And that's all it would have taken, and it would have felt so much more rewarding. Um, and these were just such well-rounded, you know, characters that I would have liked to see a little bit more of that. But it's a pretty small complaint, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like it was a fun experience, like I said. But when I go back and I think of Fallout 3 DLCs, this is not one of the first ones I think of. And when I do
No,
think of it, it's almost purely because of the wackiness of it.
yeah,
So, where are you feeling for this one?
I'd put it at least B.
Okay.
It's I feel like it'd do it a disservice at C because it's not as though I dislike it. It is what it is. It's meant to be kind of a wacky side adventure, and in that context, it's perfect.
Hmm.
Compared to these other DLCs, it's definitely not quite as much. Uh, but it's a lot more content than Operation Anchorage. So it would be hard for me to put it lower than Anchorage.
Yeah, that's true. I'm feeling like I feel like it should be C or B, but
I
when
could
I
see it being C.
but
That's
when I
not
compare
terrible.
it to Broken Steel and Anchorage, it's like I think it's better than those. I think it's better than those. And putting it here almost makes me want to take like Anchorage and put it to C. But
Yeah.
yeah, we don't have to do that unless you
No,
feel
the
like
the
it.
only reason Anchorage is at B is because the items it adds to
Yeah.
the game are just so necessary. And again, that's really the only thing that's keeping it at B. It's
Hmm.
very, I wish you could do C and a half kind of thing, but
Yeah, a C
Zeta
plus.
definitely takes out Broken Steel and Anchorage in terms of, uh, you know, writing and just atmosphere in spades.
Yeah, I feel like Mothership Zeta is where Fallout really found its like each of these is almost like a test. Like, okay, how does a first person shooter feel? How does like a dark, gringy, realistic thing feel? How does like a scary, almost horror for foreboding, excuse me, story feel? How does zany fun feel? Like, how does
Yeah,
zaniness feel? And I feel like this is the one that spoke the most to Fallout writers and like the creators of the next games, because you see a lot of this silliness echoed in the other games. Old World Blues. But
definitely.
you see a lot of that in the other games where I feel like they haven't really tried first person shooter. They haven't really tried brutal realism to the same degree. Everything's got a little twinge of the zany since Mothership Zeta. And I mean, to be honest, before Mothership Zeta too. But I think that is a big contribution that Mothership Zeta made to the franchise.
Without a doubt.
Now, to Fallout New Vegas, which had incredible DLCs that
Yeah.
they had stories that spanned the entire um, length of the DLCs with the oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name.
Ulysses.
Ulysses, yeah. Oh my gosh, sorry. Um, so they've got this other courier, Ulysses, that are just sprinkled in to each of them. So you kind of have a little taste. You know he's out there, but you don't know what he wants. You don't really know what his goals are. But it all starts with dead money.
Yeah.
And dead money, I think, just nails the kind of not necessarily like foreboding horror, but more of a horror jump scare kind of game.
Yeah.
And you know, it's just got this great atmosphere. You've got the oh my gosh, the ghosts, I think they're called, aren't they? With the
Ghost people. Yeah.
people, yeah, that they don't die, and you know, you've got to do extra stuff to kill them, and you go in with nothing, practically nothing, but you get these little tokens, and you get these things that you can spend on vending machines to get more ammo or more stim packs or items, but you have to unlock the individual items that you can buy. And like, there's a lot of different collectible things where if you really spend time going through the zone, you'll have maybe not more than enough, but you'll have an adequate amount of items to get through it. But you're always feeling that pinch of, man, you know,
Is it enough?
This is scary. You know, can I make it through without having to go back and buy more stuff? So that's a great, just a great feeling. And then the companions in Dead Money are just amazing. I mean, you've got God and Dog, which is just such a cool mental kind of character where it's like they captured split personalities right in a character where each of them have different strengths and weaknesses, and you have to learn when to flip to one and when to flip to the other. And likewise, you know, Dean Domino is such a cool character. You know from the beginning, the first time you meet him, that he's going to screw you over. But you go through with it anyway, and it's just a really good, fun time. I think it's really challenging compared to some of the other Fallout DLCs, but I really, really enjoy this one.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, talk atmosphere, talk about horror. It's always the most memorable thing of when you start that DLC and you're by the fountain with Veraki's hologram, and it's always kind of like, shit, I really don't want to leave. Like, do I really have to go in there?
Yeah.
And it's literally an undead city with ghost people running around. It has atmosphere in spades. I mean, it is just spectacular. It catches kind of the grittiness of the pit, and taking all your equipment away. And even further than that, at least the pit, I'm pretty sure you can bring a few pieces, a few items. This is absolutely nothing. You're giving a hollow rifle with bulk ammo, and it's practically broken to start with. And something I really like about that aspect is it makes you really appreciate things. You know, a lot of times I think you're supposed to be level 25 or higher when you start this. So usually when you're starting this DLC, you're pretty well along. You know, you have great weapons, you have great armor, hundreds of stim packs, and this makes it, you know, so you don't get all of that. And you know, when you're level 25, you don't even look twice at a box of sugar bombs or, you know, junk food or just a random scrap metal. It's just not something you even care about at that point. In this thing, you pick up everything. It doesn't matter if it's dirty water. It doesn't matter if it's a pilot light or scrap electronics. You are getting anything, where what was before trash is now gold to you. And I just really love that because it makes you have to be so creative in the way you play. Whereas before, you know, I run into this big problem, I'll just dump stim packs until I fight my way through it. That's not an option for this. You have to be smart. You have to lay traps. You have to be sneaky. You have to eat trashy food, but not to the point where you get radiation sickness, because then, you know, the benefits outweigh the positives. And there's just so much depth to how you have to play this game, and just visceral fear. You know, even when you're going in there max level, I not that long ago I completed a max level, you know, one of the strongest characters I ever made, and I played it on very hard, and it's like first ghost person you run up to and he almost kills me. And it's like, that's one ghost person. How the hell am I going to get through this whole thing? And you know, you just want to stay next to that Vera hologram thing because it's like it's just I don't want to go further, but you have to because there's no going back, and
Yeah.
I really love that. It's almost painful going through it.
Yeah.
Um,
It it
yeah,
it's just got the right feeling to it, and like you're kind of exploring the background of this this casino owner that's trying to make this place huge, and he's trying to make this woman fall in love with him, and you really just buy into the entire world that this takes place in. And sure, it's zany and it's kind of weird. You got the ghost people and they're like flying over the place sometimes, but you've always got this like, oh, I'm in the police station, I'm safe, but am I? God or
yeah,
dog or is on the other side of this. Is he my friend? Is he not my friend? And the only person that's really with you or like supporting you the entire game, and I don't feel scared about, is the mute person,
Christine.
Christine. And she's still interesting because even
Yeah,
though she doesn't have any dialogue, literally no dialogue, she's still interesting.
yeah. I love Christine. You have a great point about that, and she's interesting because she has connections to uh, Veronica.
Yeah,
She's
Veronica.
Veronica's ex-lover, so she has
Mm-hmm.
connections to the base game. She's mentioned heavily within Old World Blues, so she has
Mm-hmm.
connections to both the base game and another DLC. Uh, but
Yeah.
Dean, he is spectacular because to your point, when you first meet him, he definitely seems shady. He's a bit dodgy character,
Well, you sit
and
on a
but
landmine that he's about to blow up. Yeah, like yeah.
yeah, but I mean, he kind of also is a bit of a smooth talker.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely very charismatic, and he almost kind of tricks you into thinking, he is your buddy. But then as you're going through things and you're reading terminal entries and stuff like that, and you just it's almost like two parallel stories. You have the current story, this terrible nightmare, and then you have this past of like Vera and Dean trying to rip off Sinclair.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, damn, you don't realize how much of a scumbag he is, and you're just slowly getting these little bits of like, oh, he's kind of got Vera on drugs, and oh, even the people back then thought he was up to something, and it just kind of builds him up of like at first, all right, this is, I don't really like this guy, but I have to work with him, but it's very quickly turns into like, dang, like this, he might actually end up being the big bad guy in the end.
Yeah.
And depending on how you're how you talk to him and how you handle the Tampica lounge situation, he might end up being one of the major bad guys. But
Mm-hmm.
he's a great bad guy. Um, One thing I really like about this is kind of the ambient noise and the silence of this game.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, you have Christine, who's completely silent. So a third of your companion use is somebody who can't speak. You have the ghost people who don't really make any noise, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really the jump scare aspect of they don't make any noise, and you just turn around and there's four of them behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Really, the only merchants in the entire game are these silent holograms, like almost just silvery ghosts that you find randomly. You have no radio, you have just kind of creepy music in the background, and talk about atmosphere when you're in a haunted undead city and all it is silence. You never rarely ever talk to anyone. There is a lot of dialogue in this, but your average running around, you just don't hear anything. You're just constantly alert of like, you know, is there that creepy ass breathing noise somewhere around me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah. So one thing, it's very difficult to find negatives about this DLC. But
Mm-hmm.
one thing I do have to say is, besides the Hollow Rifle, and the Hollow Rifle is a spectacular weapon,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't add much in terms of like items. It adds armor. You get the Sierra Madre armor, which is really good armor. But by the time you do this, around level 25, if not longer, a lot of times you have a lot better gear than that. Uh, you get cosmic knives and cosmic knife spears, nobody uses that afterwards.
Hmm.
So one negative thing I have to, the police pistol, that's also a pretty weak weapon. I think the automatic rifle is a decent weapon, but again, by 25, you're usually using assault carbines and sniper rifles if you are using guns at that point. So about the only negative thing I can say um, about this thing is that it doesn't add much in terms of equipment, which is a pretty weak criticism because that's the only criticism I could make about this thing, and it doesn't add many consumable items.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it kind of goes to show that, like, yeah, the cosmic knives and the police pistol, they're not very good, but when
No,
you're in the DLC, they are
they're gold.
gold,
Yeah,
and so it almost creates an environment where you see those things and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, even though it's not that great of an item. So it was like an interesting way to introduce an item that's not going to change the base game when you get back to it,
uh,
but they feel important and they feel amazing when you're there. Um,
yeah,
and the last, or not the last piece, but one of the things we haven't really talked about yet is the ending. And you're given the supposed to be impossible choice of, do you take Sinclair's fortune and become trapped there forever, or do you leave
yeah,
with practically nothing? And you're faced with Father Elijah, who had to make that same choice.
yeah. Hardest part is letting go. I mean, that's
Exactly.
it's definitely, the writing for this is spectacular. It's all about greed. It's all about people unable to let go on every level. You have Christine, who's not able to let go of her obsession of hunting down Father Elijah. You have
Mm-hmm.
Dean, who's been there for how long as a ghoul? Like, hundreds of
Hundreds of
years,
years. Yeah.
and he still hasn't given up on it. You have Elijah, who's completely ruined his life. He was an elder in the Brotherhood of Steel, had all this stuff, and he gave all of it up because couldn't let go of finding new technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Dog and God, he just can't let go of having two personalities. He's just a freak. But and it's difficult. It's the ultimate lore of these golden bricks, and it's more money, more caps than you've ever seen in your life. And it's like, well, it's great, but if I'm really gonna make it out of here, I can take maybe one of them, or
Yeah.
I can drop all of the equipment I've picked up and maybe bring three of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a total of 15 or 17 gold bricks. So no matter what, you're leaving something big.
Yeah.
Now, we both know that there's definitely ways to get away with all of
Yeah.
the gold bricks.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a cool aspect of it. Um, two things that this DLC does great, and it's two things I've been harping on a lot: collectibles. Uh, Collecting the Sierra Madre chips is
Mm-hmm.
something you do throughout the entire thing. You also can find Dean's caches throughout the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's dozens of them out there. You can also find a Sierra Madre playing cards throughout the entire thing. So there's tons of collectibles. There's challenges to find all of these different terminal entries. There's just tons of challenges of just collecting all these items, which I think are great. And then the second thing is, it really, you were talking about Fallout 3 really being test bed in
Mm-hmm.
terms of its DLCs. This thing got what Anchorage got wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Anchorage tried to be this first person shooter in a game engine that just was not built to be a first person shooter. This did a better job. Dead Money made a survival horror game,
Mm-hmm.
and it just did a so much better job of it, where the sneaking system in this game is spectacular and it works great for this. The crafting system
Mm-hmm.
is leaps and bounds better than Fallout 3's, where if you go in there with top level survival, top level repair,
It's
you can do quite a lot with what you find.
yeah.
Just trash. You can just make really good equipment with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it does a great job of basically turning normal role playing game Fallout New Vegas into a survival horror new game, and it does it very well, and the engine lends well to it.
And kind of my last point that I'm going to make
Yeah.
is it ties into the broader Fallout world very, very well. You
Hmm.
know, it ties into the whole. You're in New Vegas and you're going to an abandoned casino. You know,
Hmm.
they take Sinclair gets tech from um, the
Big Mountain.
Big Mountain, yeah, Big MT, um, and Dean Domino is someone that you see posters of all throughout the game, and you finally get to meet him. Father Elijah, he's talked about all the time in the Brotherhood of Steel and through the other DLCs,
Yeah.
and Christine, likewise, she had everybody you meet except for God and Dog. Um, they are intimately tied to the rest of the world, and you know you may not know who they are, but the second you kind of figure out how they fit into the world, you're like, oh man, oh I did that. That was actually much more important than I thought.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think they just nailed it.
And it gets connections to the end. It's at the end of the game, and this is one of the reasons I use Veronica so much as a companion in base Fallout New Vegas, is because depending on the ending, whether you trap him, Father Elijah, in the vault or you kill him, he'll leave different notes for her, and it'll give her, I think, if you trap him in there, you'll get Rantings of Elijah, which will give her increased damage, or you kill him and you get Last Words of Elijah and increases her damage threshold. But it's your choices in this game actually affect your
Mm-hmm.
companions back in the normal world. And I,
Yeah.
I you know, I love any DLC where you can go back and have a unique line of dialogue with someone based on your choices in that DLC, and that is just so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. So I know where I want to put this one. Where
Yeah,
are you feeling?
easy S,
All
S
right.
plus.
All right. Good. I agree.
I'm not even going to go into how great of a bad guy Elijah is because, you know, if I need to explain it, people just won't understand. He's just the epitome of greed, mad scientist man. Like,
Yeah.
just, I always play mad scientists, and I always model my characters off Father Elijah because he's just so cool.
Yeah. No, I really like it, but and he's such a personality, but you don't even meet him until like
No,
the very end of this DLC. So it's just it's great. I think
yeah,
it's probably my favorite DLC in any Fallout game.
no doubt about that.
And with that, we have finished our first DLC for New Vegas after an hour and
One
20
hour
minutes.
later. Yeah.
Literally. Okay, so next, this one is a little bit different. You know, it still ties into the rest of the world, but Honest Hearts. And this one, I think, kind of gets to what you were talking about in Point Lookout, where you felt like the tribals were just a token piece. This is you kind of going in and seeing what is tribal, you know, what does the quote unquote uncivilized world in Fallout do? What does that look like? What are the tribes? What is Caesar saving everyone from? And along with that, you get a beautiful landscape where you know beauty is not super common in Fallout, but a very beautiful landscape in Zion. And you get one of the best characters in the Fallout franchise, Joshua Graham.
Yeah, a lot to love on Honest Hearts. To your point, in a series where pretty much all you see is bleak wasteland,
Mm-hmm.
there's rain in this game. I'm pretty sure it's the only, maybe except for Far Harbor, part of the Fallout world you ever see rain in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just beautiful. It's Zion National Park. It's literally one of the best national parks we have in the country. Joshua Graham, the coolest, among the coolest characters, I think fan favorite,
Yeah.
really.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely.
and yet huge connections to the real Fallout world. Like you hear about the Burned Man base game in New Vegas. You hear about the Malpace Legate, and it's like kind of this scary boogeyman type guy. And when you meet him, he's almost like a born again Christian,
Yeah.
yet he just has that fire still in him, and his lines, we can't expect God to do all the hard work. We have
Yeah.
to do our own killing. And
The
his
fire
his
inside
one-liners.
burned hotter than the fire around him. Like he's a
Yeah,
walking quote machine. Yeah.
yeah. And I think all of the Fallout New Vegas DLCs had a great job of they all had an underlying theme.
Mm-hmm.
Dead Money was greed and not being able to let go. This one was, basically war and peace. You
Mm-hmm.
have Daniel who with the Sorrows who are just overly pacifistic. You know, even though this is the Sorrows' home, it's not worth fighting for because you're going to ruin the innocence of these tribals who have been able to avoid all these atrocities of the war, your post-war world. And then you have Joshua Graham, who's just hate and war incarnate, who's just the epitome of the ends justify the means, who are trying to militarize them with his dead horses. And it's just really the power struggle between them of who's going to decide the fate of these tribals. It's very cool, and I like that it's not just kind of a series of quests. It's telling a story with a important narrative and like interesting underlying tones.
Yeah, absolutely. And it specifically for New Vegas, it's really interesting to see. We hear a lot about Caesar's coming in, and he kind of the Legion breaks the tribes and makes them into the Legion. And we don't really know what form that takes. We don't. They don't really go that in depth, or at least I wasn't quite sure what they meant. And then you go into Honest Hearts, and you have um, kind of the tribe that's trying to ally with Caesar, and their job is to wipe out the other tribes. And if they do that, Caesar will welcome them, and they don't realize that that means the destruction of their identity.
Yeah.
And much like Point Lookout, Honest Hearts was not. It is a story, but it's not a hey, go here, walk through this path until you finish. It's you're dropped in and you can explore the area as much as you want. I mean, there's all of the survival. I forget his name. The survival man, the guy that's like going around.
Survivalist, yeah.
The survivalist. He goes around protecting these children that live here until the end of his life, because he finds them and he's like, oh my gosh, these kids are alone here. I don't want to go see them because I will corrupt them. I just need to protect them.
Yeah.
And he kind of creates the Sorrows by
Mm-hmm.
by giving them that peace. And it I always saw it as he's the one that he's the example to that the Sorrows kind of live for, is the innocence, the protecting others, but not damning them for what you do to protect them. I found his character in that little side story to be very interesting. Um,
It's heartbreaking. Like reading
yeah,
some of his stuff, like his life was just the epitome of like hell.
yeah,
And to your point, he finds these people, and it's really their innocence that keeps him from effectively killing himself.
yeah.
Uh,
And he's
yeah.
a nice contrast to Joshua Graham. I know we said Daniel's a contrast, but Daniel is involved. Joshua Graham is trying to actively militarize these people to war, whereas and everybody knows who Joshua Graham is, but this survivalist actively stayed away from them to keep their innocence and protected them from afar, and no one even knows his name. And
Mm-hmm.
he's just a very interesting contrast to Joshua Graham in Honest Hearts.
Yeah. Another aspect I really like about Honest Hearts is it fleshes out. You kind of already touched on this, how it did what Point Lookout couldn't in terms of really fleshing out the tribals. But there was so much stuff that was discussed in this game or in this DLC that is never seen of, is never really interacted with. They talk about New Canaan and
Mm-hmm.
the New Canaanites and all these people. How many lines of dialogue was dedicated to just talking about the 80s? this
Hmm.
tribe that's out, I think it's further west or something, or no, further east, and there's got to be over a dozen lines of dialogue talking about the 80s, and it's a tribe that's not even included
Hmm.
in this thing. So I feel like it opens a lot of doors for maybe future games
Hmm.
of kind of, it talks about the war dogs of Denver, and it talks about all these tribes that are never actually in the DLC, but it fleshes out this whole aspect of the world of basically the Western United States and a lot of the Midwest are just tribes of people.
Hmm.
And, it's not just the cities on the West Coast and the East Coast. There's all these people in the interior who are effectively barbarians.
Hmm.
But, they're their own interesting stories. And I feel like it opens up a lot of opportunity for future work.
Yeah, I agree. I
Um,
absolutely agree.
yeah. I also like the fact it's a large, open, explorable area.
Hmm.
It's a huge difference from playing, Dead Money is open as well, but it's definitely
Hmm.
very confined.
Yeah.
This is you get room to move around and explore a little bit, which is a huge change of pace, and it's really nice. It introduces tons of consumable items.
Hmm.
You get the Datura root, you get blood shields, you get all this stuff that is really, if you're into survival, which is a skill they introduced in New Vegas, it really fleshes out survival and it makes it into a skill set that's a lot more valuable. Um, this area is returnable. I
Hmm.
think it's besides um, the Divide and Point Lookout is one of the few places that you can return to after completion, which
Yeah.
I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I do have to say there are a few negatives to it,
Hmm.
at
Hmm.
least for me. Um, One is that if you don't really do the side quests, and this is more of a choice thing, but if you're slow on the side quests, you can very easily get through this entire DLC in like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Uh, it can be very quick. It doesn't have to be, but it can be.
Hmm.
Another thing is the opponents in it are, I don't want to say uninteresting, but it doesn't add a lot. You have the white legs who are pretty cool, um, and they're unique and new to the game. And then it adds Yao Guai, which were not in the original New Vegas base game, but are a holdover from Fallout 3.
Hmm.
And then every single thing else that's in it is in the base game. You have giant mantids or giant praying mantis things, which are in the base game. They're just a little bit larger. You have cazadors. You have uh, geckos, you have all these other things, um, but it doesn't add a lot in terms of new enemies and stuff like that. Uh, and same thing with weapons. You get the 45 caliber pistols and submachine guns, and you get the Yaogwai gauntlet, and you get the dead horse club thing.
Hmm.
But I think aside from Joshua Graham's unique weapon, that's about really the only item I use. Maybe Joshua Graham's weapon and his armor are about the only two items that's super usable after the DLC. The Yao Guai Gauntlet is good, but
Yeah.
a lot of Power Fists are better. The same thing with the Dead Horse Club. There's a lot of melee weapons that are a lot better than it.
Hmm.
So it has tons of story, does tons of world building, but me being liking those cool items, it doesn't give a lot of good items.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, definitely it is the shortest of the Fallout New Vegas expand or DLCs,
uh
and I think it's one of the shorter besides probably Operation Anchorage.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily feel like that while you're playing it, but once you're
No.
done, you kind of end up on the cliffs, and you're just thinking, well, what else do I do? It's
Yeah.
I definitely felt that the first time, and the next few times I played it is, I felt like it would be more than this, just as in terms of time, because while I was there it was fun, but once I finished it, it was like, you know I wished it was longer.
Yeah, and not to say, I mean, there are again, if you're just doing base quest, main quest line, you'll be done very quickly, but there's a lot of exploration that's
Yeah,
just,
that's true.
tons of caves and locations that are just never really used in either the main quests or the side quests that add tons of content, but you just have to really take it on yourself to do that because there's not really a lot of direction to take you on that. Another kind of, two more points I'm going to make. One is that the companions are a little bit lackluster.
Yeah.
You have Follows Chalk and I forgot what the girl's name is. I don't remember what it is. And they're interesting. They have interesting stories. Follows Chalk wants to go see the rest of the world, and the other lady, her husband's died, and you have to decide whether you're going to tell her or not. But they're not that interesting, especially when compared to Dead Money. They're companions because you need someone to be there to help you. They don't add a whole lot to the story. And then second to that, there's not a great bad ending to it. If you're doing evil karma, it's basically help Daniel, everyone escape, help Joshua Graham kill the Whitelegs, which you can do as a good ending anyways, or you just kill Joshua Graham and that's it. It ends.
Yeah.
And I really wish there was some option, if you're a Legion character, to be like, hey, Legion reputation check and join the Whitelegs and destroying everybody. I totally would be okay with that still being a shorter ending, but that ending of if you're doing hardcore role playing I Am Legion, all you do is show up, kill Joshua Graham, which is an intense fight, and then DLC ends. So I would have liked for them to have, I feel like Legion, besides being one of the major factions in New Vegas, they kind of get short-ended a little bit, where they don't, they don't have as many merchants, they don't have as many quests, they don't have many settlements, and their DLC options are a little bit limited. But those are, aside from that, those are pretty minor complaints for what is overall a really good DLC.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely super fun. I mean, you're right. The companions were not incredible. I would have wished, kind of across the board, like you said, that Caesar's Legion had a little bit more play, because I played them once, or no, well, I played them more than once, but I played a Caesar's Legion playthrough the first time, and when I was finished, I was like, I don't think that there was anything else I could have done differently. Like, there were tons of situations where if I'm playing NCR or Mr. House, I'm kind of having to pick between the two of them. But Caesar's Legion, there were just a few pieces where I could actually act.
And this is the Burned Man.
Yeah.
This is the Legion's boogeyman. So I feel like of all DLCs, there should have been a more fleshed out Legion option for it, because this is literally you killing Caesar's arch nemesis.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, I agree. So what are you thinking for this one?
I would say it's a healthy A.
Okay.
I would put it. I mean, I would want to put B plus, but in reality, it's way better than Anchorage. It's way better than Broken Steel. It's way better than Zeta. I think it's far more comparable to the Pit than it is to any of the things we put in B so far.
Okay.
What would you put it as? B?
I was thinking B, but the more I want to put things in B, the more I think, man, I don't know if Operation Anchorage should be there. Or
I think by the end of this, Anchorage is going to be in C.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. Okay.
The only reason it's there is the equipment, and that's about the weakest reason it could be in there. Is not good.
Yeah. Now, time for what is probably, I think, the biggest DLC in New Vegas, Old World Blues. Now this one, like I mentioned when we were talking about Mothership Zeta, this is the zany one from Fallout New Vegas, but they really, really lean into it. They go as hard as they can in the direction of what's weird sci-fi, silly, low-budget movie kind of mad scientist. And so you have, Mobius and the lobotomites and the giant reactor-powered rad scorpion, and just such silliness. But then you also get the high school, and you get just these different areas that have a little bit of a horror theme to them, but they're always kind of funny. And this little old world blues portion has a really the only player home for any of these expansions that we've talked about thus far, where you can go back to it. You can always sell. You've got a built-in merchant. You've got a ton of quote unquote people around that you can talk to, and most of them are just great characters. Like you have the toaster that wants to destroy the world. You have the seed things that just have this really odd sexual
Plant
undertone.
your seed, baby.
Yeah, exactly. Like every one of them is memorable, and just this was, hey, we gave you a new area to explore in the open world. Have fun. And I think that's where the Big MT shine, or Old World Blues really shines.
You're totally right about that. I mean, this is really just a content dump of all content dumps. Like I did a little bit of research. There's 18 added clothing and armor items. There's over 35 locations. There's over 20 unique enemies. So that's not just lobotomites. That's named lobotomites. That's named Mr. Gutsies. That's named Securitrons. 20 different legendary or unique enemies just scattered throughout. The vast majority of them have nothing to do with any side quest or main quest. It's just an open bowl for you to explore.
Like the Deathclaw that's the size of a dog.
Stripe.
Like that.
There's just so much content there that it's. And the cool aspect about it is you don't have to do it all before you leave. You can this DLC theoretically can be really quick. Actually, it's only a few quest lines long for the main quest line, but you can take it at your own pace. You can finish it up really quick and then go back to the Mojave and then shuttle back and forth, or you can do it all in one kind of slog of finishing everything and then completing the main quest line. And it is minor, but if you do discover every location, do every quest, and defeat every unique monster or enemy, it changes the end slideshow, where it's very difficult to get an end slideshow that says, oh, the courier found all the different mysteries of the Big Empty. And it's for people who are going for those max completion runs, this has tons of stuff for you to do. Tons of unique items. Another aspect I really like about it is it connects to the other DLCs thickly. It talks about Elijah tons. It almost talks about Elijah more than Dead Money does. It talks about Christine. It talks about Ulysses. I think it's the first time you actually hear Ulysses' voice. And it's the DLC before Lonesome Road, so it's building up a lot of that stuff. And then just the voice act, Dr. Mobius, Dr. Klein, finger penises. Like it's the people who did the writing and did the voice acting for it just really did a great job of it. Is just a crack up to listen to. It's interesting. It's just scientific jargon that it seems like they're making it up on the spot as they're saying it. It's really entertaining.
Yeah, and it's just so Fallout. And I've said that a couple times, but it is what Fallout, I don't know, it feels like it should be. That's what Fallout that's where Fallout really excels, is just the zany, hilarious wackiness that's also kind of difficult and touches on some dangerous lines. Like it's really a cautionary tale of curiosity can go too far. But bar none, the characters in Old World Blues are just so memorable. And I know this is one of your favorite points about it. The radio there is completely different. It gives you this jazzy radio station, which I've always found, if I listen to it for too long, I always seem to start getting a headache. And that might just be me because I don't listen to a ton of jazz, and I do like jazz, but it's perfect because that's what it should be. Like
Yeah.
like if I'm in the big MT for too long, I should have a headache. Like that's just how it
Yeah.
is. Um,
Yeah. And
Go ahead.
that radio station is definitely something the game needed too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great because it's a radio station you can access in the base game, or
Mm-hmm.
not in the base game, but when you return to New Vegas, you can access it, or maybe even before, as long as you have the DLC loaded in. And it's great because really the music in New Vegas is spectacular. You have
Mm-hmm.
Mojave Radio, which is kind of all these Western ballads, and then you have the new Radio New Vegas, which is all like that kind of Frank Sinatra Vegasy stuff. So this is a good addition where it gives you a third radio, and anybody who plays Fallout, you always listen to the radio. So
Yeah.
the more options you get for it are spectacular. I miss this little, when I was running out those numbers of all the things it adds 24 weapons.
Wow.
24, and that's including all the different sonic emitter variants, but that's a lot of weapons, and almost a great deal of those weapons are very competitive when you
Mm-hmm.
return to
Oh
the
yeah.
normal game. Elijah's Lair, it has a terrible durability. It has one of the worst durabilities in the game, but it also is probably the most powerful energy weapon in the game. I
Mm-hmm.
tend to go hollow rifle simply because that durability aspect. But Elijah's Lair, if I'm going to fight Legate Linnaeus or any other end boss, I'm bringing that weapon because it's going to kill him in just a handful of shots.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One thing I do, very difficult to find anything negative about this DLC, but two only qualms with it is that opening conversation sequence drags.
Yeah.
It's very funny. It's comedy after comedy, but it's difficult because you begin the DLC and it begins that slideshow giving you the information in the back story of the big empty. So that's a good 2, 3, 4 minutes of just you sitting there listening. And then after that, it's about another 10 minutes of dialogue of listening to the think tank. So that's, combined, you're starting this thing out with a good 15 minutes of just nonstop dialogue. And again, that dialogue is super well written, super well voice acted, but it's clumped up where I feel like sometimes I wish it was spread out a little bit more evenly throughout the DLC instead of it seems to be very top heavy. It's very front loaded, which again, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to complain because it's so witty and entertaining
Mm-hmm.
and zany and wacky, but it can be a little bit much for somebody who's kind of super hyped. They're ready to start this DLC, and it kind of just pumps the brakes on it real quick.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, but I
no,
will also say briefly that probably my only qualm with this DLC is that sure there's a ton to do, but really the main quest that you're in there to complete is very short and
yeah,
very kind of unmemorable. Like it's fun to be there, and the environment's more memorable than the actual story is. So
definitely.
um, I think that is something that kind of goes against it.
Yeah, and then the only other thing is if I played it on very hard, it there's very large health pools
Mm-hmm.
for the Robo Scorpions and the lobotomites. Again, that's just part of playing very hard. And that's part of playing a DLC that's meant to be played when you're a higher level.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it can be kind of draining where it's like, okay, I've used all the microfusion rounds that I brought, and I've bought all the microfusion rounds from the sink,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I'm barely halfway through the DLC. Like, how am I going to get enough ammo for it? It's a kind of a lame complaint because again, that's part of the game is being having very different types of weapons and finding ways to get that ammo, but it can be a little bit difficult in that aspect. Uh, but I like any DLC you can return to later, and to your point, the sink is probably the best player home in the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
You have one of the only, as far as I know, one of the only repair people who can repair equipment 100%, which is very valuable. It's expensive, but it's valuable. He has a huge pool of caps, and especially if you're selling to him and buying from him the entire time, he always has a large pool of caps that you can use. You have, something that you can grow your own food. You can create your own purified water. You have a auto dock, which if you're playing survival mode, you can't repair radiation and broken bones by sleeping, which is how most people would do it, or even stim packs. So having that auto dock when you're doing survival mode is super valuable, especially as well as making that purified water. And then the auto dock, the implants that they offer are actually very valuable too. Yeah.
Something you go back into, when I play New Vegas, Old World Blues probably has the biggest impact on my character after he leaves, because I've gotten so many bonuses from the Big MT, and I always go back and forth.
Yeah, definitely. It's you can go back and forth with Honest Hearts. I can't say I ever have.
No,
I think I've went back once or twice to get, because I realized I missed a cave or to grab more Datura root or something. But Big MT is something, or the sink is always a place I'm always returning to. So it does feel like a real player home, and it feels lively. Sometimes it's a single player game. The game can feel a little bit lonely, and going into a place where everything's talking to each other and everything's like interacting is pretty fun. I really like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. So where are you feeling Old World Blues lands?
S+.
Okay. So do you I know they're both in the S tier, but do you put it above Dead Money?
I mean, it's tough. They're very different. I think Old World Blues is the perfect DLC for New Vegas. I think in that it's a perfect RPG DLC. It just gives you a great open box to play in. However, Dead Money is great in that it gives you a new game to play.
Okay.
Where if you're tired of the New Vegas RPG and you want to play survival horror, you can do that, and it's a bit more of a challenge. But I wouldn't be able to say one's better than the other just because they're so different.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. They're both. I think honestly they're number 1 and 2 regardless of which way you rank them.
Yeah.
In all Fallout DLCs. Sorry for the spoilers.
I agree.
All right, so last one or not last one, last story DLC for Fallout New Vegas is Lonesome Road. Now, I like Lonesome Road, but I do feel that it kind of dragged on to me. You enter the Lonesome Road, the Divide, to find Ulysses, and you kind of meet an iBot that you connect with, which I think that whole story was great because you get the iBot, you upgrade the iBot, and then when the story's over, you go back to the wasteland, the Mojave, and you're like kind of sad because that was your companion through the entire story, and then Edie gets that iBot's memories and all of the upgrades. So it's one of those times where you really see a tangible upgrade in a companion because of what happened in a DLC. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's the only time besides Veronica with Dead Money that ever happens, where something you do affects a companion after the DLC, which is definitely cool.
And that drastically too. So I really liked that. I love the ending confrontation between Ulysses and the courier, and the whole nuclear option where you have to decide, well, are we nuking the Divide? Are we nuking the NCR? I think the last option is nuking Caesar's Legion. Is that what it is? I can't even remember.
It's Caesar's Legion or NCR or both or neither.
Okay. So I like that option. It's very reminiscent of Fallout 3's options at the end of Broken Steel, where it's clearly the good guy route and clearly the bad guy route. Um, but Ulysses is just a very interesting character, and he's been built up through um, Dead Money, through Old World Blues. I feel like he's touched on a little bit in Honest Hearts, but I can't remember where.
He's
But
mentioned. I think Joshua Graham says he was expecting a different courier.
that's right. Yeah, and he's kind of trickled in, and he's like the antithesis to what you are.
Hmm.
You're an unassuming courier that died. He was supposed to be the courier that changed the face of the Mojave. So he's a very, very interesting character. He talks to you throughout the storyline, and it's very interesting. But that whole middle bit where you're fighting the mutant things,
Tunnelers.
the tunnelers, and they are just so difficult.
Hmm.
And I know there's a portion of the story that's basically saying that they're traveling underground to the NCR, and that eventually they'll break through and overwhelm the NCR because there's just so many of them. And I really hope they never do anything like that, because
Yeah.
it's I just wasn't really interested in that storyline going in that direction. I found the Tunneler's story a little bit interesting, but if I had to play an entire game fighting those things, I wouldn't really have a good time. So I feel like for this one the highs are very high, but the middle bit is just not interesting. And to be honest, I can't remember a lot of it, even though I think it's
Yeah.
the most recent one that I played.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right. It has a lot of highs and it definitely has a lot of lows. Um, Similar to Old World Blues, it is a huge content drop.
Yeah.
You get 22 armors and clothes, 17 different weapons, several different consumables. I like different aspects it adds, like the flare gun, where it's something, it doesn't even do damage to stuff. It's literally
Mm-hmm.
about scaring things off that are too big for you to deal with in that moment. So I liked a little bit of that creativity. Um, it definitely was not well received. The community is not a big fan of this DLC, and I think it's a victim of its own hype,
Mm-hmm.
where you spent literally up to Prim, or as early as Prim, you learn about the Courier 6, and he's kind of alluded to or directly talked about in every single DLC. At the end of Old World Blues literally ends with oh, they never even thought about the Courier again until stories of the Battle of the Great Divide talked about, and there's one road left. There's so much build up to it, that I think there was really high expectations of like Ulysses and what was exactly going to go on, and that's tough to write for.
Yeah.
And I felt Ulysses' voice actor was super great, and some of his writing was good, but some of his writing was really bad. Like I don't, definitely halfway through it, it's like if I hear him say the bear and the bull, the bear and the bull, the bear and the bull one more time, I'm gonna carve out my own ears, because it's just he's supposed to be this hugely thoughtful and philosophical person, but it's almost was just kind of like ranting nonsense, which was maybe what they were going for, but I was hoping for something a little bit more coherent, and it was more of just like, oh, well, I'm going to tell you your own backstory. And it's like, well, maybe I'm role playing, and maybe that isn't my backstory, and maybe you just broke my game by saying that. Uh, so I feel like they took out a really big bite, and that was hard to chew. And it was a lot to take on. But saying all that, there was a lot of things going for it. It definitely was another attempt at doing a first-person shooter in the Fallout world, and it did it a lot better than Operation Anchorage did. They had made huge improvements to the smoothness of the game and the operation of the guns. So
Mm-hmm.
in that aspect, the first-person shooter aspects were really good. Um, it was incredibly linear. There wasn't a lot of exploration or open worldness you could do. But that was also interesting because, this is Lonesome Road. This is about your last journey. So it felt like a real journey. You're going on this road, and it had great landscapes, great wasteland. I know you were saying you didn't like the tunneler aspects of it, but some of the tunneler aspects of it were cool because you're literally walking in buildings that have already fallen over. So you're kind of finding weird ways where you're actually walking on the wall and trying to find holes in the roof to escape.
Mm-hmm.
Or, the high road where you're in this high overpass thing because the land below you is too dangerous. And it's, I thought they did a really good job with creating an environment that felt very hostile, but yet was very interesting, and you had to find unique ways to get around. Um, and in addition, this DLC did a really good job of, full completion people getting all the collectibles.
Mm-hmm.
You had to find all the Ralphie posters to get a certain challenge done. You had to find all of these certain terminal entries. You had to find all the mods for all the weapons, all the mods for Edie when you went back. There's a lot of stuff where, I almost nearly forgot detonating all the warheads.
Yeah.
Where if you really are going for a full completion, this can take a really long time to work your way through because there's just so many different posters, different terminals, different things to blow up. Uh, there's just a lot of content where if you're just kind of trying to rush through it, you can definitely miss a lot of that stuff. But it can be really rewarding when you get the end of it and it's like, wow, I've spent what could have just been 2 hours. I've spent 5 hours getting through all this stuff, and it felt very cool. Um, I definitely like, talk about having an effect in the world. I was just hoping for being able to talk to some of the companions in former DLCs. This reshapes the world. It opens up new areas. If you nuke either the NCR or Legion or both, you can go to where you nuke them, and it's incredibly difficult areas to fight. And I like that aspect of it because it almost reminds me of Point Lookout, where it
Mm-hmm.
is you can bring as much equipment as you want. You can come and go back and forth as you please to pick, drop off stuff and get new equipment. And it's really just a test of really bring the best you have and see how well you can do because these are going to be really difficult enemies. It's all death claws. It's all marked men with really good weapons. Or, if you go to where you detonate the nukes on the NCR Legion, ghouls that are just stupidly powerful. You literally cannot bring enough rat away. There's so much radiation, and as you're going through it, you're just creating more radiation. So it is really it's a good end to New Vegas because it feels like just one big end boss fight slog through all of it, uh, and it feels rewarding, especially in the end. If you end up whether even if you side with Ulysses and he joins up and you have to take on that huge wave of marked men, that's a tough fight, even with
Yeah.
Ulysses with you. And if you end up fighting Ulysses, that's one of those things I've never even done it before because it's like fighting Ulysses and having about 20 marked men all coming in with some of the best guns in the game. That's just a brutal fight. I think it did that very well.
Yeah, I agree. It's I was probably a little hard on it, and you're right. Like, there's certain moments like running on the collapsed skyscraper sideways and like jumping down windows and stuff like that. That was really fun. The marked men made cool end game enemies because it's like you're fighting Legion and NCR troops, but it's okay to kill them basically, and they've
Yeah.
got all of this amazing weaponry that those two factions would actually have brought to a kind of big war or big offensive against each other. So I agree. Lonesome Road it's you're right. It was very overhyped, or not overhyped, but the
No, it
hype
was overhyped for sure.
the hype made me wish for more Ulysses, and what almost like the Joshua Graham that we got. I would have loved a Ulysses kind of like that where we're interacting with him, maybe not face to face, but just more often, but just his kind of messages to us every once in a while. And like you said, the bear and the bull, it's like he just didn't have that same punch.
No, yeah, it needed way, I don't want to say better writing, or just he needed to be more than what he was. After all that they had built him up to be, he was not as interesting of a character as he needed to be in order to fit. Because, the entire DLC is based around him.
Yeah.
You know, Honest Hearts, at least Joshua Graham holds up his end of that, of actually being the main character and being that interesting. Ulysses isn't that interesting in the end, and it's a bit of a disappointment, I feel like.
Yeah.
Another, one of the few negative things I have to say about it as well, on top of I definitely agree that the tunnelers were not that interesting and were annoying as hell to fight, was that a lot of the weapons that they introduced in it, I never even really used. They were interesting, like the red glare, that, kind of multiple rocket launcher, the shoulder-mounted machine gun, the flares. You have Old Glory, the badass, Golden Eagle flag melee weapon. They were very cool. I can't say I used any of them after the DLC.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the armor was very popular, like the riot gear was very good gear, as well as a courier outfit thing you get at the very end of it. That was good gear. But the weapons in general, I think there's a nail gun maybe involved too. A lot of them were interesting, but even going through it, it's like, okay, cool, I got this red glare. I'm going to switch back to my hollow rifle or MF Hyperbreeder or Lair, because this is such a difficult area that I need my good weapon. You're kind of bringing in all you can bring in. And I never once felt tempted to use one of the weapons they gave me, because it's like, it's interesting, but it's, I need the best of the best, and they weren't the best of the best.
No, I agree. It's the items, besides the fact that the what was it, the Riot Ranger armor or whatever,
something like that. Yeah,
that's like the coolest looking armor in the game. But besides that, a lot of the items I never touched once I finished that that DLC. So I agree with you. Where do you think it lands then?
I put it at probably a B.
Okay.
Maybe lower. It's tough. I mean, I felt like it did a better job at first-person shooter than Operation Anchorage. Way better, but again, it didn't really use very much skills, which was a little bit of a disappointment. It was all kind of shoot, run and gun kind of situation. Yeah, and it's just, I think if there wasn't so much hype, I would rate it higher. But yeah, I would have to put it at no higher than a B. And at this point, we've talked about it over and over again. I think we got to demote Anchorage.
Okay.
Because again, the only reason it's at B right now is because the items, and that's not a reason for, it's a bonus, but that shouldn't determine its location. I almost feel like Broken Steel should be lower too, but I'm gonna. It extends Fallout. No, I mean, it extends Fallout 3's game, so you don't end, and I think that is valuable enough to make it at least B.
Now, what about Mothership Zeta? Does that move down to C, or are you comfortable with that being B?
I'm comfortable with that because I think the companions are interesting enough. I think the equipment it adds is interesting enough. I would say the only negative part is it's boring at times, but I think it adds enough style to the game that I think it's fine where it's at.
Okay. Now we're getting.
We might change our mind.
Yeah. I mean, if this list is definitely not set yet. Now we're getting to our first non-story DLCs with the Courier Stash and Gunrunner's Arsenal. I'm going to leave these a little bit more to you, especially the Gunrunner's Arsenal, because I know that you've actually tested all of those guns and you've done almost a different playthrough for each gun in that Gunrunner's Arsenal. So I'll leave that to you. I feel like the Courier Stash was kind of unnecessary.
Yeah, definitely one of the weaker things added. I think it's only kind of benefit is if you're role playing,
Hmm.
and you're going in as I am a tribal, and so you really should start with tribal armor and a machete and a few throwing spears, or if you are a vault dweller, so you want that armored vault suit. But I think it's completely unnecessary. It almost makes the beginning area too easy,
Hmm.
where it gives you too much equipment. I would have liked it better if it gave you a choice of which one of these. I think it's three, maybe three or four kind of equipment sets, and it said, oh, what's your background?
Exactly.
Uh, Doc Mitchell asks, oh, what's your background? And you choose one of those four. Instead, it just dumps everything on you. So I would put that at a D, frankly. I think it's totally unnecessary.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree, and that's the DLC that gives you the cantina, right?
yes.
So I almost feel like that should have been for survival players, players that wanted to play survival, but it almost
Yeah.
trivializes it because it
Yeah.
does so much, and it's like, well, okay, if I'm playing survival, I'm trying to have a challenge. You're not giving me a challenge. You're just giving
Yeah.
me
And
the answer.
I think the one redeeming quality of that is that cantina for the sheer comedic effect of, like, something terrible happens, oh my, whatever it is, and it's just like you take a sip of your trusty vault
Yeah,
cantina. It's like, oh, talking about how, at the very end of the game, oh, and Caesar tossed the flaming body of, General Oliver, and you take a sip of your trusty vault can, and it seems
yeah.
such just out of place, and it's not at all what it was intended to be.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree, and
so yeah.
I think you're right. If it could have been more of a role playing aspect, I think that would have been much better for it. So like
Hmm.
whatever your particular background is, you get items from that background, but that's just not how it was executed.
No.
So I agree with D for that. So Gunrunner's Arsenal, a lot of the guns in that are very interesting and kind of, I don't know. It kind of makes it more of an event to get to the gun runners.
Hmm.
But I'm gonna put it pretty much with where I would put anything that's just adding kind of weapons and that sort of thing. But again, I want to defer to you on this one because I know you have a
Yeah.
lot more
So
experience with it.
we're gonna differ heavily on that, because I think Gunrunners is similar to Broken Steel being a necessity for Fallout 3. I almost feel like Gunrunner's Arsenal is a necessity for New Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
It adds unique weapons to almost every single merchant in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it adds a lot of really, I mean, weapons I've come to, the MF Hyperbreeder, the
Mm-hmm.
unique recharger pistol is a weapon I get every single playthrough I play.
Mm-hmm.
It adds so many different weapons, melee weapons, guns, energy weapons, explosives, like adds so much to the game. It adds different ammos to the game. So, base game, the the Fat Man is pretty much a pretty lame weapon. Like, it's got one ammo variant. There's nothing you can add to it really. It's just, you know, have you ever used the Fat Man in New Vegas?
I have.
You have, okay. I'm guessing probably not often, right? Like
No, it's one of those things I hold on to, and then I shoot it once, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna actually do it a different way.
yeah. It's having this DLC has changed me on that completely, because it adds different ammos for it. So instead of just one Fat Man shell, you have Fat Man low yield, so it's something you can actually use more realistically, or high yield, so it's a disgustingly powerful Fat Man. You have Tiny Tots, which shoot about 6 different small mini nukes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, adds, it's something where after you've played with it, going back to a game that doesn't have it, it feels like something really critical is missing from the game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I know this is going to take you by complete surprise. I would put it at A or S.
Wow.
Yeah, just because, for what it is, for a content pack that just adds weapons, it's about as good as it could have gotten for just adding weapons. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, it's
Wow.
not on the same level of Point Lookout or the Pit or but it's that's not what it's trying to be. It's not a story thing. For what it is, which is just adding weapons and ammo, it adds a lot, and it adds really cool challenges. So, for example, it adds challenges where kill 15 Deathclaws with either a 22 pistol or a switchblade,
Jeez.
which is, when you're max level, you definitely hit a point in New Vegas, even if you're playing on very hard difficulty survival, where you just become so powerful that really nothing is ever a threat to you. You just
Mhm.
have the best weapons, the best equipment, maxed out skills, super great special stats, and it forces you to do things that are just weird. So it'll be like, oh, like I said, killing those Deathclaws, or using a submachine gun killed 20 different members of the three families on the New Vegas Strip,
Mhm.
or kill a certain number. It makes you play the game in weird ways to just get these random challenges.
Mhm.
Kill 15 named members of the NCR. Uh, kill cazadors with nothing but grenades.
Oh,
Like, it makes you
jeez.
do just weird stuff where if you are maxed out, you've done everything else in the game. It gives you a way to keep the game interesting.
Mhm.
And I really like that aspect where it gives you cool weapons, gives you great ammo, uh, different ways of using weapons and ammo, and then it forces you into challenges that keeps the game interesting even at max level.
Mhm. Yeah, okay. All right. I think you've sold me. I guess I'm gonna put it at A.
Yeah, fair enough.
I can't in my bones justify an S for that, but I'll
Yeah,
I'll
I
I'll go
understand
with
that.
an A. I'll go with an A. Now, Automatron. We're entering the realm of Fallout 4. So this is
Yeah,
where my experience with DLCs is a lot less. I'll
yeah.
comment on things, but most of it is going to be on you because I know you've played through most of these several times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Fallout 4 has definitely been super lackluster in DLCs.
Hmm.
I think they definitely tried to go with more of the Elder Scrolls approach of two major DLCs and then a handful of small ones, as opposed to the traditional four DLCs
Hmm.
that's expected of Fallout.
Hmm.
Um, and Automatron really epitomizes this. You know, it, it's just pad. I think it adds 3 locations total. It
Hmm.
doesn't add any new map area at all. It's all within the existing map. It adds just 3 locations. I think it's actually only 2 full dungeons, because one of the 3 locations is just on top of one of the other locations.
Hmm.
So it really adds barely any content. Uh, it can be completed super quickly. It adds the Rust Devils Raider group and then rogue robots who go around, so kind of new mobs to fight
Hmm.
in a game that I don't think needed new mobs.
Yeah, that's
This game I think was fine with having super mutants and raiders and, your random Institute or Brotherhood mob. It didn't need that.
yeah.
Uh,
For Fallout 4 is one of the few games where fighting different enemies feels like fighting different enemies. You're gonna fight, mole rats. Even if they're easy, they erupt from the ground beneath you, and you kind of got to fight them in a different way than you'd fight bloat flies, than you'd fight rad scorpions. And there's a lot of variety already. I didn't think the additional random patrolling robots were really necessary.
No, and Fallout 4 does a great job as it feels like a very full world. There's tons of locations, tons of mobs, tons of things. It didn't need that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I felt like this, it just felt like a very cheap DLC. Um, it, uh, it felt more of like a single quest mod than it felt like a full scale DLC. And especially the equipment it added. I've been harping on this all night, and I'm sure you're tired of hearing about equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But it added barely anything.
Mm-hmm.
It added some Rust Devil armor, uh, and then a few kind of weird, unique weapons, and almost none of them were actually competitive or usable in the game. They were kind of just oddities to throw in there. So it didn't really change your play style at all. Ada, the companion you get from it, is one of the most annoying companions I've ever had. Typically, when I start this DLC, I'll park her at a settlement I never am at. I will never put her at Sanctuary Hills or any other location where I'll ever be at,
Mm-hmm.
because she'll just randomly start on monologues of just just uninteresting stuff, and she's just annoying to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
So as a companion, she's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then the Mechanist layer, which is after completing the main DLC, uh, you get this kind of base, and it's a cool base. It feels like you're kind of almost in Batman's cave, uh, but it's not even a real settlement. You can't have settlers go there. You can't really build all that much there. It's more of just a player home in a game where settlement building has made player homes so customizable and so cool
Mm-hmm.
that you would never actually go there, because why would you go there when you can have a whole city built for you, when as opposed to just one room.
Mm-hmm.
uh, the main bad guy, the Mechanist, super uninteresting. The story behind them is so shallow, and so it's basically just a person of, oh, I wanted to do good in the world, and I read the Mechanist comic books, which was obviously a throwback to the antagonizer and the Mechanist from Fallout 3, which I liked that aspect, that they did kind of an ode to that quest line. But it was just like, oh, and I stumbled across this robot factory and I started making robots, and oh, my bad, they didn't turn out that well. And that's it. And it's like there's no interesting story behind her. Her story isn't even really fully explained. I would have loved to see it of her being the daughter of the Mechanist from Fallout 3, but there was no connection whatsoever between the Mechanist in Fallout 4 and the Mechanist in Fallout 3. So just super lackluster. I've said almost all negative things so far. There are a few small benefits, and that's almost all crafting of your ability to create robots.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that does wonders for role playing. Like, as I've said before, I model my player character after Elijah, and it's like a mad scientist. So being able to produce my own robots and have them be kind of funky variations of all these known robots is really cool. I really do like that. And a lot of the companions in Fallout 4 are really interesting, but none of them are particularly powerful. They
Mm-hmm.
kind of just draw fire away from you. They don't really land kills. I think Paladin Dance is one of the few who I would say is actually as a significant impact on the battlefield. The vast majority of them are running around with pipe rifles or pipe pistols, and are essentially just drawing fire away from you from like one or two of your opponents.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got good points in intelligence and doing robotics, you could just be a super squishy, weak person, but you've got a robot that's got two Gatling lasers that just mows everything down. So
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's very cool. Uh, Again, from a role playing aspect, and then just from a gameplay aspect, having that option to do that. um, and it's sorry,
No,
go
I
for
mean,
it.
so it's funny because the one thing that you really said was a positive for Automatron was you get to build your own robot companions, but it's like a big problem I have with a lot of or some of the Fallout 4 DLCs. And I'm saying this as someone I actually thought Fallout 4 was a very good game. It
Oh, I
it
love Fallout
it
4.
was not what I was expecting it to be. It was, but the more I played it, the more I actually fell in love with it, and I see a lot of incredible progress that's been made. And a lot of people are, always say, "Oh, we're worried about the next Elder Scrolls game because look at how what they're doing to Fallout." I always think I think it's a great sign what they're doing with Fallout for Elder Scrolls. They've taken lessons, they've taken it in a new direction, and it's really good. But a lot of these DLCs are almost just mods that people could make that they ended up selling. So like Automatron, like you said, it seems like it's just a little game. I'm sorry, a little one or two quest mod that's supposed to introduce crafting your own robots, and I could totally see that as someone building that themselves. Same with kind of the other building mods that they have. I could completely see people making assets in mods, like being able to create your own vault that sure wouldn't have the polish of a Bethesda, you know, crafting system or vault building system, but I don't know. It just seems kind of unsettling to me, or not. I don't really enjoy the fact that many of these story mods for Fallout 4 are really just DLCs rather are just mods. That are a little bit polished. So that's really all I'll say on Automatron.
Yeah, and that's the sad part too, is it's not supposed to be like Vault Tech or Contraptions or Wasteland Workshop.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a story DLC, and it just wasn't. I found it incredibly disappointing. As you could probably tell, I'd put that at about D.
Okay, I think that's fair. Yeah. Now, I know you really, really like this one, Far Harbor. In particular, I think this one does a really good job of kind of what we touched on for Old World Blues and The Divide is it can involve your companion from the base game with Nick Valentine, and it's something that isn't necessarily obvious at the beginning because it gives you your own companion to play through that with, but you get a totally different perspective if you bring Nick to Far Harbor.
Yeah, Far Harbor, and I think Far Harbor and Nuka-Cola were great in that I feel like Bethesda focused all their attention on those two, and the other 4 DLCs for this game were essentially stuff that probably should have just been in the base game or felt like mods. But yeah, Far Harbor was spectacular. It was a massive, massive area. We're talking about 52 new locations. It's probably one of the biggest mods. Again, I was loving on Old World Blues because it had 35 locations. This is 50 new locations. Yeah. Tons of really interesting characters. You have the Gulpers. You have the hermit crabs, which are literally giant crabs that live inside of cars. So like, I can remember perfectly the first time I was running through, and as usual, it's Fallout. There's just destroyed cars everywhere. And then the car moved, and a giant crab emerged out of it and tried to kill me. And it was so creative, and it was such like a new, the interesting enemies you face, the different mutants, the different animals, the different robots is what makes Fallout so interesting. So the fact they were able to add something that just wowed me that much was spectacular. Talk about atmosphere. This was definitely major lineage coming from Point Lookout, where it was, again, you're on an island. It's very creepy. There's fog all over the place. There's these crazy monsters that have super heavy or super large health pools. It just felt right. Every person there, it just matched the New England atmosphere. I think it was supposed to be based in Maine. In the main city, you just have a Mirelurk just being cooked in a giant tub while it's still alive. Like, it was just a crack up. But it was also very serious too. Like Dima, the kind of the main synth, the brother of Nick Valentine, was one of the most interesting characters probably in the entire Fallout 4. Fallout 4 was all about synths. Yet it wasn't till Far Harbor that the synth story actually for me got really interesting. Of this, this synth who's trying to create a home for his people, and he's having to do these terrible things. He's having to kill people and replace them with synths, and giving people homes with the intention that he has the power to destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
And the memory of that is so damaging to him that he's able to physically remove it, so he forgets.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually, has you as a quest go retrieve these memory fragments, and you and him both learn together what a monster he is.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he's also this altruistic person. So it's just the story was super rich, huge area, some interesting new weapons. The weapons and equipment, I'm not even going to go too far into that, but 24 new weapons, 37 new consumables, 30 different armors and clothes. I mean, the sheer amount of content that was dumped in this was massive. And then, you know, a great aspect that they did a great job in Fallout New Vegas, they continued it in Fallout 4, was player choice in terms of factions and endings. You could take the synth side and help them kill everybody else on the island, or you can help the synths make peace with everybody. You can help the people of Far Harbor kill all the synths, or you can make peace between them. You can help the cult of the atom, the children of the atom, just irradiate and nuke everything. It's so many different options. You can even just skip the entire main quest line, go in there, talk to Dima, fly back, and then just tell the Institute or the Brotherhood, and they just fly a strike team in and kill them, and then the DLC ends right there.
Oh
Like,
my
it's
gosh. Yeah.
so there's like 5 or 6 different ways of ending the game, or of ending this DLC, where it just felt like it was almost a mini Fallout. It should have like a mini Fallout Far Harbor, Fallout Maine, and it would have just been perfect. I think it was spectacular. Like I said, great atmosphere. Kind of going through this scary mist with these giant angler fish that are now the size of death claws walking on the land. It was spectacular. It adds 4 new settlements, which I thought was cool. That the settlement system is probably one of the coolest additions they had to Fallout 4. So including that whole aspect into the DLC, I thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
It adds 3, effective, I said 4 settlements you can settle, and then 3, essentially cities. You have Arcadia, you have Far Harbor, and then you have the Silo, I think, or no, the Nucleus, which is
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the Children of the Atom's main base, and they're all really interesting. Uh, it's hard to find anything negative to say about it. I would say the only negative thing is that it's very easy to go and, like, if you're just doing the main quest line, you can miss a lot of the island. You kind of have to take it on yourself, similar to Honest Hearts, to really do the exploring yourself. And then also, if you're not that into the whole synth storyline, it can get kind of boring because it's all about synths and
Mm-hmm.
kind of the moral problems brought up by the synths. But I think it's really cool because Fallout 4 was about synths, but the main quest line didn't really ever talk about the real moral, ethical, interesting issues brought up by synth technology, and this did.
Yeah.
So Far Harbor was spectacular.
Yeah, and I mean that was my favorite part of Fallout 4's story was the legitimate science fiction kind of, like, that's what science fiction was made for, was to address these big moral questions or moral issues that you don't necessarily address, but like what does it mean to be human? Is an artificial being that can think and feel, is it human? And I love the fact that they really did an entire DLC really going deep in on that idea, but also with the same kind of, just, I don't know, atmosphere of Point Lookout, and just, or maybe not the same atmosphere, but like a similar kind
Similar
of,
though.
like you go there by sea. It's like a wet area. It's I don't know. I always see the two as kind of linked, where they knew they had this great story and they're like, well, where could we do this? And somebody was playing Point Lookout and thought, oh, maybe not like a Creole swamp, but maybe more of um, like a northeastern fish bake kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I really like that, and I think it works with the kind of Boston, Massachusetts feel.
Yeah, and again, great side quests. I mean, I think they could have released this with just the side quests
Mm-hmm.
and half the main quest line, and it would still be a great DLC.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right. So what are you thinking this one falls in terms of rank?
I'd put it at A.
Okay.
I think it's it's about as good as it could get in terms of just sheer content, sheer, you know, open world, whatever you want to do,
Yeah.
player choice. Yeah, it's got it all.
So you're sure it's not an S? What would it have taken to make it an S then?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I'm sure had I played Far Harbor as a younger person and I had that nostalgic piece to it, I'm sure it would have been an S.
Uh-huh.
But I feel like, uh, for me, the synth story was interesting, but after playing all of Fallout 4, I was a little bit played out on the synths.
Mm.
So the first time I played it, I felt a little disconnected from the story, and I kind of was apathetic and didn't really care as much.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I played it now, I'd probably enjoy it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, going back to equipment, a lot of the weapons that it introduced were interesting, but not really very usable.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think its atmosphere was good and really, it was unique from Point Lookout. I don't know. Maybe if I played this again, I might put it at an S.
Mm-hmm.
It's frankly hard to think of reasons not to like it. But yeah, maybe it's just the nostalgic piece that it's not quite old enough for me to have loved it that much.
Mm. All right. Well, we've still got a little bit more to go. So, of course, if you change your mind, we can always. I'm comfortable putting it up at S because in my mind, I think of Far Harbor more like I do Old World Blues, Dead Money, Point Lookout than I do Honest Hearts in the Pit.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, when I look what it's next to, it's totally not even close to the, Honest Hearts and Gunrunner's Arsenal in the Pit. So
Yeah.
you throw it up on S because
Okay.
I'm literally struggling to think of something negative to say about it.
Exactly. And you're even saying it's probably just your nostalgia keeping it a little bit lower.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think Far Harbor is there. I'm actually really excited to play my next playthrough of Fallout 4, just because I really you talking about Far Harbor makes me almost want to just speed run someone over to that so that I can play it.
Yeah, I think you'll love it.
Yeah. Now, I feel like we could probably do all three of these next ones together.
Without a doubt.
I kind of feel upset with, or not upset with them. I have an issue with them for the same reasons I kind of had an issue with Automatron. They're not. I don't really see them as a necessary component of the game, like maybe you did with Gunrunners.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they're an added little extra bit that you can have, but I don't see them as any more valuable than like a really well polished mod.
Yeah.
Now, what for what they do, I think they do it very well. I mean, if you want to build a vault, the Vault Tech DLC is better than probably every vault building mod there is in Fallout 4. So they're definitely good, and it's not like they charge the same for Far Harbor as they do for the Wasteland and contraptions and that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it's not meant to be a story thing, a story DLC. It's not meant to be the Gunrunners. It's meant to be just a little bit extra. which is why, and you can tell me no, Nick, you're stupid. I would almost say I think those should be C tier, because Automatron and Courier's stash, they almost do the opposite of what they're supposed to do. Like the Courier's one, I think it's actually better to not have it in the game. Automatron, well, I don't think it's better to not have it. It's a story DLC that is not a very good story DLC, and makes me feel like it was just to get the build your own robots into the game, which is a cool idea, but again, not crazy interesting. Whereas the Wasteland Workshop, the Contraptions, and Vault Tech, they did add something unique to the building system of Fallout, which I think I did have a lot of fun building in Fallout. And I did have fun kind of putzing around with these DLCs. So I'm kind of torn. I really don't know if they should be C or D's.
Yeah. I mean, before you said all that, I was going to say it's an easy D, but you are right. I mean, for what they are, and that's the argument I made for the gun runners.
Mm-hmm.
For what they are, they do it well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this Wasteland Workshop and Contraptions added a lot of cool stuff for settlement systems. It allowed for like automation, so it allowed you to, so you're not constantly working and doing these, tedious menial tasks. It allowed for you to kind of automate that, which was really cool. I liked the idea of catching beasts. It kind of reminds me of the Thorn in New Vegas, or just various other arena situations where you can kind of pit monsters against each other. So I definitely did like that. But they were essentially just very well executed mods. It's hard for me to say it was worth. I look at games like, for example, totally off topic, but Grand Theft Auto, where it's years and years and years old, yet they still constantly release new content, and it's all free. And I felt like these things were cool content, but would I pay for it? I got got the season pass, so it was included, but I remember playing it before I had the season pass and then playing it after, and it was almost kind of like I couldn't tell what it added. Where it was, I thought the catching animals was cool, but I never really personally used that. I thought automation was helpful for the people who probably do these huge, build sessions, but again, I never actually used it. The Vault Tech one was probably the only one I used even semi-regularly, and I thought that was cool. I thought the idea of building your own vault was really cool, kind of running your own vault experiments, and you can be super, unethical about it and stuff like that. That was a cool idea. But it also had limitations too, where a difficulty with settlement building is there's caps. You can only build so much. Obviously the game will crash if you overdo it. So there's built-in caps if you can only build so much. And that's true with the vault as well. There you can only build so much. So even though you have this vast underground area to build in, you actually can't physically fill it, all the area that they've given to you, because you'll hit the cap too early. And it's a very high cap, but there's still limits to what you can do. So I felt like it was like, I think it would have been cooler if it was just basically, no holds barred, build whatever you want. This is your area. But that's not what it was. It was essentially just a really, it's like Spectacle Island. It's just a really cool build area, but you're just limited by certain aspects of that game. And, you're right. For what it is, it did a good job of that. But to call it, a good Fallout DLC, compared to all the other things we've talked about, could I really put any of these things on par with Operation Anchorage? Operation Anchorage was pretty bare, but it added a lot of cool stuff to the game and added a lot of content. So it's tough. I think where you put these on the list probably depends on how much of a settlement builder you are. I like building settlement stuff, but I don't go so deep into it where I'm using all this stuff on a regular basis. Uh, for me, I would probably put Wasteland Workshops and Contraptions at D, and I'd probably put Vault Tech at C.
Okay.
Just because I really like the idea of building your own vault, and there is at least some content of going in and recruiting vault dwellers and running experiments on them that are, you know, kind of entertaining. But they're nice mods. That's about the best thing I can say about them.
Yeah, and I think that's probably a good way to do it is break it up a little bit because I think they're interesting and I think they're good for what they do, especially for console players that can't play on a computer with mods.
Yeah.
But that's changed. You can get a lot of DLCs on consoles now. So hopefully this is something we see less of moving forward in Fallout. What'd you say?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But
I think this is microtransactions in a different form. But
yeah, well,
I don't shame Bethesda for doing it though, because I understand.
Yeah.
In order to make games like Skyrim and Fallout 4 continue to be profitable, you have to have stuff like this.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people out there really love this stuff. But for me, I'll take it or leave it.
Yeah, the key thing to me is adding something that's not easy to mod into the game. So the whole automations, the capturing beasts and fighting them, the doing experiments on people. That's what I really think these mods are good for, or these DLCs are good for. It is the things that are, not the building, the kind of ancillary stuff that isn't easy to put into a mod on your own if you're not, a team of developers working at a AAA studio. So I think I'm pretty comfortable with where we landed, though.
Yeah.
So we're at the final DLC so far for completed Fallout games. We're obviously not including any of Fallout 76 here. And that is Nuka World. I will briefly say I loved the idea for this. I think it was such a I've been wanting them to do a post-apocalyptic Disneyland or amusement park forever because I think that's just such a cool idea. This is definitely the zany DLC for Fallout 4. But what really bugs me is that you're kind of a big focal point of Fallout 4 was the settlement system and the Minutemen and that sort of thing. And to do Nuka World, you have to be a kind of raider if you want the story to have any real depth to it. So I like the fact that it's fun to or it kind of forces you to play it a way that maybe you're not comfortable with. But it's kind of hard for me to think, well, I want to play a DLC that I have to be evil for. Like almost every DLC we've talked about, sure, they give you choices, and this DLC does give you choices as well, but almost every DLC lets you be bad or good. And then when you come back to the kind of the overworld, you are the same character. If I were to play this on almost any of my Fallout 4 characters, I would have to save the game, do Nuka World, and then reload to my prior save because I feel like I couldn't go back to the world as the leader of Nuka World in this raider faction. But,
yeah, I mean, I think
what do you think about it?
I think you've hit it right on the head. It is a spectacular DLC without a doubt. It's super creative. I think we've even talked about, many years before this ever came out, how dope it would be for a post-apocalyptic amusement park. Like it's great. It definitely plays on the same, kind of comedic, zany thing as Old World Blues and Mothership Zeta. It's very much in that same vein. It's massive is an understatement. It is well over 60 marked and unmarked locations. So that's, some people would probably say, it's not as big as Far Harbor because all that's 50 locations marked, but 60 locations marked and unmarked, that's huge. Um, Another aspect I like about it is just its sheer diversity, and it comes in just how it's built. As it's different, similar to Disney World or Disneyland, as different parks within it. So you have Galactic Zone, Dry Rock Gulch, Safari Adventure, Kitty Kingdom, Nuka Town, USA, Fizz Top Mountain. You have all these places that are all so different from each other. Galactic Zone is all robots and technology and lasers and, kind of world of the future type thing. And you have Dry Rock Gulch, which is like all cowboys and like weird flesh eating worms. And then Kitty Kingdom is spectacular. It's like, you know, magical fantasy land and castles with a radiation haze and a bunch of clown ghouls running around. Like it's horrifying yet, just a crack up at the same time. Every single one of these Safari Adventure with Deathclaw gators and literally Tarzan with a bunch of gorillas living in it. Like it's spectacular. Every single zone is fun to play with. That's probably the one thing I would say against Far Harbor. I was trying to look for something to say against it. Is it's tons of space, but it's all essentially the same. It's all the same theme, so it can get boring at times. This never gets boring. Even going in between the different parks is still like these empty wastelands where you have like a random gas station, or you have like kind of the hubologists, which is obviously a reference to Scientologists and stuff, who think that all this trash from Galactic Zone that wasn't used was actually alien technology, and they were trying to use it to get off the planet. And it's just so many aspects of it are really fun. You have the Great Wizard Waldo or whatever, which is again similar to Dean Domino, somebody who was on posters in New Vegas, and he's this ghoul who was doing a gig in this kitty kingdom, and it just got nuked, and he got irradiated, and he just became the master of all these ghouls. All of them are so interesting, just really well done. The radio, again, similar to Old World Blues, they did its own radio station, and this one was all original music. Every single song in it
I didn't know that.
was made by the guy who narrates it. So it's basically the guy narrating it, and then he'll just break into song halfway through. The stuff he sings about is he'll just literally sing about, yeah, you want to know why I'm called Red Eye? It's because I drank too much, and then I got in a fight with a guy, and he stabbed me in the eye, and then I just impaled him with that knife back into his face. It's just a dude, he almost reminds me of the guy from Eastbound and Down. I forgot what his name is, but he's just an overconfident, cocky, just dick. And he's just talking about these totally exaggerated, fake stories about his life. And he just thinks he's the greatest thing ever. And it's just a crack up to listen to. It's definitely a little bit short. I think there's only like maybe 3 songs in the whole thing, maybe 4. But it's just cool that they went through that extra work of making just 4 Wasteland Raider songs. Tons of collectability too. You have the Cappy marks, similar to hidden Mickey Mouses, hidden throughout the park. You have the Star Cores in order to get the Nuka-Cola Quantum Power Armor set, which is actually probably the best power armor set in the game, in my opinion. You have, tons of different stuff like that. You have interesting characters. You have Sierra Petrovia, who was the person who had you collecting Nuka-Cola Quantums in Fallout 3, and she's there, and her teeth are all rotted out of her mouth, but she's there as like a tourist. So it's just totally zany, totally funny. Fizz Top Mountain, they give you a cool little player home. I wasn't a big fan of it. It was kind of just a weird layout that I never really used that much, but it was cool again that I like it when they give you the opportunity to have a player home that's kind of separate from a settlement system. To your point, it is difficult, especially if you're playing a good player. your option is essentially play the DLC or free the merchants, kill all the raiders, and then skip to the end of the DLC. So you know, especially there's very cool kind of weapons like Aterius, the best Gatling laser in the game, which I really want Aterius because let's say I'm playing a Paladin of the Brotherhood of Steel and I really want that weapon.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get to the point in the game where you're raiding the Commonwealth in order to get that weapon.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, especially if you're the type of person who, full completion kind of guy, and you're building your settlement empire, in order to get everything you can out of this DLC, you have to mess up your own empire back in the game and mess up happiness levels, and
Mm-hmm.
it definitely doesn't feel good. Like I wish there was a better good option for it aside from just, oh, you want to be good, cool, skip to the very end.
Mm-hmm.
And again,
Exactly.
you still get to experience all these different parks, but it's less about conquering them for the different raider tribes. And I get that. Of all these DLCs, it's almost all either light side or good side, or all good side. There's never been a single DLC it's the bad guys DLC, and that's what this is. So I
Mm-hmm.
definitely respect it for that. Um, but for a game where probably vast majority of people tend to go good karma playthroughs, at least for their main characters, and I know that's not speaking for everybody, but it's probably speaking for a lot of them. This DLC will definitely throw a wrench into that, and that's kind of difficult. Um, Saying that, it's kind of worth it just because how fun it is, and you can kind of role play it out of, oh, my character is on vacation from being a good guy and he's just a bad guy for this place. So I also like how they added all the different Nuka-Cola flavors and how you can mix those flavors together and make different combinations. It added a lot of cool settlement stuff, like you can get Nuka-Cola mixers in your settlements now. So if you're making kind of the perfect player base and you just want a soda machine, you can add that. So I think that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
um I wish, I've said this from the beginning, this is such a random critique of it, but the main guy who's helping you, I totally forgot his name. Not Gage, because whatever. uh he's basically this kind of old grizzled raider, and he's kind of your advisor. I thought it would have been great to have him be Jericho from Fallout 3, because Jericho
Mm.
used to be a raider, and he's
Yeah.
kind of this old grizzled raider, and I thought that would have been a cool thing. Kind of weird, random ding on it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, all that stuff aside, everything it adds to the game, it gives you the Habologist laser, which is an alien blaster, which you can convert to use microfusion rounds, or I think they're energy cells in this game, but it gives you a lot of really cool weapons. The commie whacker, uh, the acid squirter. It just gives you tons of cool stuff. Uh, and talk about atmosphere and well themed. This thing, it feels like you're in Disney World after the world ends, run by raiders. Like, it just
Mm-hmm.
feels wacky. It feels out there. And each section the stories are so unique that you really don't get bored with it. That's one, I guess, the one negative thing I'd say about Far Harbor is it's really easy to get bored of it because it's so much of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
This, you never get bored of it. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. No, you know, it, I almost feel like I want to create a bad character just to go for Fallout 4, just to kind of get the full experience of Nuka World, because it definitely seems fun, and I probably just haven't given this DLC a chance because I do tend to play good characters,
Yeah.
just because I feel like nine
Easier.
times out of ten it's easier to play the good guy than the bad guy.
Yeah.
But maybe it'd be worth it in this situation to play the bad guy and just go all in.
Yeah. I think so.
So what are you feeling like for Nuka World then?
It's tough. it would be an easy S, and it'd probably be among the top three when I would say S, uh, except for that aspect where two, if they just made it so at the very end of the quest line, then you start setting up raider outposts in the Commonwealth, I think this would be easy S, potentially top two even. But that one aspect, it is kind of a major caveat that it kind of gets in the way. I wouldn't be able to put it lower than Far Harbor personally. I love its style so much that I would either put it S or put it A and dump Far Harbor to A. But I don't know. I think it'd have to be S because it's definitely better than the Pit. It's definitely better than Honest Hearts, and it's better than Gunrunners.
Yeah, and I think I think that's right. Like I'm pretty comfortable with what our S's are. I'm pretty comfortable with our A's, pretty comfortable with our B. I'm really happy pretty much throughout with what we landed on.
I'm still iffy on Broken Steel and Anchorage. I feel like Anchorage could go up or could stay where it is, and then I feel like Broken Steel could stay where it is or it could go down one, but I think it's fine. I gotta say, one more thing. I think Nuka World is really Fallout at its best. It's hyper stylized, hyper zany, hyper wacky, huge open world, very diverse, tons of very competitive, very good weapons and armor, tons, I guess not tons of player choice because you got to kind of be a bad guy to do it. But there is player choice available. You can choose which raider factions to support. You can, if you really want to, kill all the raiders and go with the merchants and play the not fun way. And frankly, as a good player, I think you could do this on your main character and support the merchants and kill all the raiders and still have an amazing time playing it. Because the best part about this isn't the raider storyline. It's interesting, but it's not the best part. The best part is going to each of the kingdoms, each of the different parks, just how unique they are, how stylized they are. It's got to be my top three, maybe even top two.
Wow. All right. So I think maybe we should rank the top 5 and then be done. We're about 3 hours in now. So
Jesus.
Yeah, I knew this one was going to be a long one, but maybe
when I make pages of notes.
Huh?
When I make 6 pages of notes to talk about this, you already know it's going to be quite a while.
Yeah, so let's each of us go through maybe our top 3. 1, 2, and 3, and then or honestly maybe just top 1 and 2 because I know you kept going with those, so I want to hear what your top 1, 2, maybe even 3 are from our
I mean I'll try for sure. I would say it's tough, man. I'd put probably Old World Blues and Dead Money tied for first. I think, to say one's better than the other, they're so different. I think Old World Blues is just a perfect role-playing game, Fallout DLC, whereas Dead Money really hits the spot in terms of making the Fallout game into something that it isn't and being really good at it. After that, I got to put Nuka World just because I love the styles of it. I just feel like it is what
it's Fallout
is
best.
Yeah, it's Fallout at its best.
Yeah.
After that, I'd probably put Point Lookout and then Far Harbor.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm on board with you. I'm definitely 1 and 2 are Dead Money, Old World Blues, however you want to arrange that. And then sure. I do think you're right. I think it's one of. I don't know if I'm set on Far Harbor or Nuka World for the 3rd spot, but I think it's one of those for the 3rd and then the other for the 4th spot. So, yeah.
Pit or Honest Heart? What would you put of those two?
I would probably go with Honest Hearts, just because I really like the Pit, but if I'm comparing like memorable characters and I'm going Asher versus Joshua Graham, I gotta give it to Joshua Graham.
Yeah, I would say the Pit's probably the DLC that's been the longest since I've done it.
Mm-hmm.
So after doing this, I mean, I can't get Fallout 3 to work on my computer anyways, but I would love to play the Pit again, just because it's been so long since I played that. Of the B list, what would you put as number one?
Of the B list, I would probably say Lonesome Road is the best.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I like all of them. Broken Steel's probably my bottom of those three.
Yeah, agreed.
And Lonesome Road, just, it does wrap up a lot of story. It has a lot of cool, interesting portions to it. And I think it's just longer than Mothership Zeta.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I gotta do Mothership Zeta because I like the wackiness, and I feel like it's underrated.
Yeah.
Because it is boring at times to play, but I just love the characters. I love the idea behind it. That's these Zetas have been around since really Fallout 1, even back when it was Interplay, and to flesh them out a little bit more.
Yeah,
I think is cool. I think if I actually was sitting there playing each of them, I'd probably enjoy playing Lonesome Road more. I think Mothership Zeta probably again is a nostalgia piece playing out a little bit. But yeah, and frankly, I could see Gunrunners going down one tier. But again, for what it is, I think it's great. It just adds stuff that needs to be added that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with this list, actually. Nothing caught me that off guard. Nothing was... I mean, everything's about where I think it should be.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to add Fallout 76 stuff to this, but maybe one of these days it'll go on sale and it'll be worth it enough for me to get.
I do hear a lot of people have a lot of fun with it. So
yeah, I love the memes of like the person saying, "Oh yeah, Fallout 76 is way better now that it's got all the DLCs," and it's him talking to a brick wall. Yeah, effectively, I think everybody's minds are made up on it, but I would like to see what they've done with it. I'm sure it's fun.
Yeah.
It's not Fallout that I'm in love with and I've fallen in love with, but I think I'm sure it's good.
Yeah, one of these days when there's a good sale, I think it'd be worth to jump in on and get it for sure. Yeah, but any final closing thoughts before we wrap this up?
I'm looking forward for us doing our Elder Scrolls DLC top lists. I think since there's fewer DLCs, it might take a little less time, but I think there's also going to be. Yeah, I have a feeling there's going to be way more to talk about.
We're gonna get started, and we're gonna talk about like Dragonborn, and I'm gonna explain all the similarities between Miraak and Dagoth-Ur, and it's gonna be disgusting.
Yeah, I think it's gonna get a little Tesla.
It might be. It might. Well, thank you so much for jumping on and doing this with me.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. Until next time.